back to the beginning again because it wasn't recorded and we want to upload it onto the YouTube record. So we're going to go back to the beginning. So good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the full council. I'm Chris Brown, Deputy Mayor of Tunbridge and Malling. And as the Mayor has sent his apologies for this evening's meeting, I am the Chair of the Council tonight. Your attention is drawn to Agenda Item 1, which sets out the guidance on how meetings will be conducted, including the ground rules. I'm aware. Excellent. I'm really glad about that. I'm aware there's a lot of public interest in one of the items on the agenda this evening, and whilst members of the public are welcome, there should not be any disruptive behaviour. If proceedings are interrupted, the public gallery will be warned, and if the interruption continues, it could result in the public being asked to leave in accordance with Council Procedure Rules 10.9 and 10.10. For the benefit of those who may be observing proceedings on our YouTube channel, members and officers will introduce themselves when invited to speak. So we'll move on to item 2. Apologies, please.
We've received apologies from Councillor Vauxhall, Bridge, Dalton, Dean, Hammond and Harry.
Any more members? Go ahead.
Pope and Barton.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 3 is declarations of interests. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. In respect of item 11, my company has provided advice to other landowners in the area who would have an interest in the outcome of the application. So on that basis, I'll be withdrawing from that item. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tatton, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for transparency, at the time again, item 11, at the time the application came in, I was the clerk to Teesside Parish Council who responded, and the chairman is here this evening. Because I expected it to come to Area 3 at the or Area 2 at the very least, I didn't have any hand in their response. Also, just for transparency, I'm an East Malling and Larkfield Parish Councillor and wasn't involved in the decision to obtain the heritage evidence. Thank you.
Move on to item 4, are the minutes. So can we confirm as a correct record the minutes of the special and ordinary councils held on the 18th of February is set out on pages 11 to 26. Can we agree those, please? Okay, so I'm going to spin through Mayor's announcements quite rapidly, as you've heard them once already, but as I said, for the record, I attended the Fast Fix opening of their new facilities in Aylesford, celebrating 50 years of business in the borough. Also attended a groundbreaking event for new retirement homes in West Malling with the local members there, although I think I was a little bit late because there's about 3 stories that have been built already, but it was nice to go in any case. Also in East Malling, I attended the Community Grow Gardens and Allotments site to witness the signing of the Armed Forces Covenant with Councillor Davis, so thank you for that. And a couple of events down in Tunbridge. And I'd like to thank Councillors Sue Bell and Councillors James Lark for their help with mayoral duties. They've stepped in as former mayors to help out with the schedule of events. And also, I'd like to just pass on my best wishes to the Mayor, Councillor Hammond. He's now out of hospital and is recovering at home. And I'm sure you'll all agree with me in wishing him his best wishes for a speedy recovery. Thank you. So next item is questions from members of the public.
Thank you, Mayor. I can confirm there are no questions from the public.
And item 7, questions from members.
Thank you. I can also confirm that there are no questions from members.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 8, which is leaders' announcements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Given that we've got lots of public speakers on the planning application to come, and I'm making the assumption that not everyone is here tonight for my leaders' announcements, I shall be uncharacteristically brief. But there are a few things to update on since the last meeting. The first is to confirm, following the extraordinary cabinet in March, that we put forward our submission for local government reorganisation on the 21st of March as per the government diktat. That has been completed and we are expecting some feedback either towards the end of this month or more likely at the start of next month. you will have seen that we signed up, as did all Kent councils, to a county-wide submission. We also put in a supplementary submission of our own, and along with our West Kent colleagues, have written separately about the importance of West Kent working together. So I'm sure this will be a theme in which I'll be returning to across future announcements. I also wanted to reflect on our second West Kent Expo that took place last month, again held with our neighbours Sevenoaks and Tunbridge Wells down at the River Centre in Tunbridge. This year was bigger and better than last year, and there was a real buzz throughout the venue. What was most striking was that the number of people who visited last year as just simply to find out what it was all about came back this year as exhibitors. And I want to pay a huge thanks to our economic development team and all across the councils who'd been working under the guise of Invest West Kent, who put on such an exceptional event. This month we've got the recruitment event. That's at the Angel Centre in Tunbridge between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock on Wednesday the 30th of April. Again, we have no spare tables for that because it's so popular. So it should be another busy day. And if anyone knows any job seekers, then please tell them to hop along. A couple of weeks ago, we were very pleased to welcome the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch, to the borough as she visited TPS Global in Disson. They're a great firm who've been rooted in our community for many years and have a strong line of success. While we were speaking, we were able to reflect on the investment at Panatoni Park and how that's helped not just the businesses that have invested there, but all of the businesses who'd have been located around the Larkfield and New Hive area in terms of recognising that as a real economic heartland of the borough. We mustn't forget this, particularly as Panatoni nears its completion. We've also seen a couple of notable successes for developments that we're leading on. And again, a huge thanks to our property, leisure and climate change staff. They've been able to successfully secure nearly £210,000 from the public sector decarbonisation scheme for air source heat pumps at Polt Wood. We're looking forward to them being installed next year. We've also secured another £327,000 from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund for community initiatives this coming year. This will enable us to run a further West Kent business support programme, purchase more mobile CCTV cameras, fund more green business grants, and also helps contribute to the nationally recognised community enforcement team and to run another community development grant scheme. Which is where I shall finish on my brief announcements, because the next scheme will have a pot of £76,600. This is much needed, given that the 50th anniversary community grant scheme was oversubscribed by 3 times. £50,000, over £150,000 worth of applicants. And let's not underestimate the difference that people think and organisations think this borough can make by virtue of the fact they continue to engage with a lot of our programmes for community development grants. And I'd finally just like to echo your words in wishing the Mayor all the best, Mr Deputy Mayor, for his recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to be brief in view of the later item. Obviously, I expect we'll be hearing lots about reorganisation. I'm glad we got our submission in. I continue to think that this is probably going to end up with local government being more remote, and it will cost a lot of money. And I echo what's been said about the other issues. Particularly, I've mentioned Panatoni, who are partly in Larkfield, and to be accurate, a lot of their site is in Ditton. There's a lot of development going on there, and could I say how I've found them to be really good developers to deal with over the various issues affecting Larkfield.
Thank you. Also, I'll be brief. Yes, great to get the submission in, and good to see joint working between the people who are probably going to have to work together even more going forward. And whilst I hear concerns about democracy, I also hope that we get economies of scale and efficiencies. West Kent Expo was fantastic. Really enjoyed going to that as well, and we'll certainly pop into the recruitment event. It's really interesting because we're trying hard to make sure our economy develops and things stay on track. But I noticed in our KPIs that we had more new businesses dying than being born for the first time for a while. So whilst it's amazing to get shares of funds and schemes that we can use, I think the trick here is to make sure we're using them really, really wisely. And I know that there's a lot of work going on to do that. So that's fantastic. The 50th anniversary grant scheme was massively oversubscribed. And in fact, I know a number of charities who decided not to apply for it because they felt they were kind of doing okay. But it does have an impact on community events. And I think sometimes we're taking away with one hand with things like parking charges and giving back with another. And that's kind of sad because it breeds dependency rather than independence. So all in all, fantastic that we get this money and great that we can give it out to the community. And yeah, also Councillor Hammond, really hope that he's back with us soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we all wish Councillor Hammond a speedy recovery. You know, nobody wants to end up in hospital, and not very nice at all. We're talking about the Panatoni site. Well, that's quite got far-reaching consequences because some of the businesses in Snodden are going to relocate there. It's a massive site. It's really going bangers down there. The take-up's quite good. We obviously notice the extra traffic coming along Leybourne Way, but we are grateful for the road that goes through to Station Road in Aylesford. Picking up on the local government reorganisations, we didn't have any inkling this was going to happen. I think David Thornwell's got it right. It probably will make local government more remote. So we've got to try and do our very best that we can with that. And on that note, we sort of feel like we're on the deck in the Titanic heading towards the iceberg, and we really do need to spend or look into providing extra facilities for our residents before we're subsumed into some great big conglomerate and the opportunity is missed. So we do need to grasp that as quick as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. We just wanted to echo other people's sentiments, wishing best wishes to Councillor Hammond for a speedy recovery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do concur with David Thornwell and Paul Hickmoss about local government reorganisation. I am concerned that this will be costly for all the taxpayers across the country who are being forced into this, and it will make local government more remote. I absolutely share those concerns. I'm very grateful for the motion that we unanimously passed at our council meeting last month, which made it clear to the government that we did not agree with their policy, but nonetheless gave me the ability to speak to our neighbours and try and do the very best I can, given the circumstances we find ourselves in. Just on a couple of issues that were raised by Lee Atwell and Paul Hickmott. Yes, I mean, the economy is going through a very tough place at the minute. You just have to look at what's happening to the stock markets and the impact that President Trump is having on global businesses. What I would say, though, is this is great because we're bucking the trend, really, in terms of being able to use the council's resources to get more money into the community and to support businesses. The Green Business Grant Scheme has opened, and we've really got the opportunity to support lots of businesses ourselves. So we've got to be there to provide what support we can, and we absolutely are. It's not a case of taking away with one hand and giving with the other. I remind Councillor Atwell that members of her group were advocating additional car parking charges, just like others across the council too. But at the end of the day, we had to be very clear about the importance of having assets that are well maintained, the importance of making sure that this council could be financially sustainable so that we can afford, frankly, to do some of the ambitious projects that we wish to do. We've done, in my opinion, a good job at that so far. We've certainly got ambition going over the next few years, and I look forward to doing my bit to deliver that. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on to matters for decisions, and item 9 is the programme of meetings for 2025 to 2027. The programme of meetings for 25 to 27 is presented for consideration in Annexes 1 and 2, and if approved, these will be presented to the Annual Council for endorsement in May 2025. Revised Annex 1 and Annex 2 have been published to correct a minor error around the Audit Committee for 26 and 27, and to reflect a move of the Housing and Planning Scrutiny Select Committee from the 30th of September to the 7th of October to accommodate the local plan process. These have been published with a short covering report as Supplement 1. Any members, any comments? Excellent. So can we agree the recommendation?
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Item 10 then is the Replacement Angel Centre Capital Plan Evaluation. So the recommendations of the Cabinet. Okay, so the recommendations of the Cabinet on the 1st of April in respect of the capital plan evaluation are attached as Supplement 2. The recommendation of Cabinet is that the Replacement Angel Centre project be transferred to the List A of the capital plan. Do we have any comments, or are we happy to agree the recommendation? Excellent. Okay, so we're now on to the next item of the agenda, and that is to move into a planning committee. So in order to facilitate the proper consideration of the next agenda item, which is a planning application, and in accordance with CPR 11.1 of the Constitution, the procedure rules will be suspended and the council will resolve itself into a planning committee. Rules relating to a planning committee, such as public speaking, will also be applied as set out in CPR 16.1 and Annex 1 of the Constitution. So it's 8 o'clock. I think what we're going to do is proceed with this until about 9 o'clock and then look for a comfort break at about 9 o'clock. So can we agree that we're going to move into the committee, planning committee? Thank you very much. So item 11 then is the planning application TM 2201-570/OA, land north, east and south of 161 Wateringbury Road. So we have our planning officers, Robin Gilbert and James Bailey, and they're going to present details of the application and to respond to any questions. Previous reports, appendices and maps considered by Area 2 Planning Committee are attached at pages 133 to 265 of the agenda pack. The recommendations and views of the Area 2 Committee of 19th of February are attached to page 131. We have a number of public speakers this evening, and these will be taken in the order that they were registered with Democratic Services. All speakers will have 3 minutes to address the committee, and they are reminded that their faces and voices will be visible on our live streaming and recording. However, we will have the presentation from our officers first. So who would like to lead that, and are you ready? Robin, over to you. Thank you.
Your worship. Thank you, councillors. Yeah. This application seeks outline planning permission with all matters reserved except for access for the development of up to 52 dwellings, of which 40% would be affordable. The development is in outline form, which means that the application is dealing with the principle of residential development on the site, with only the details of the access from Wateringbury Road into the site for consideration at this time. All other matters would be subject to future consideration through reserved matters, subject to approval of the outline planning application. The site itself is approximately 4.6 hectares of commercial orchard on the eastern side of Wateringbury Road, with the site being outside but immediately adjacent to the village settlement boundary. The site is bounded by existing vegetation comprising hedgerows and tall shelter belts to the west and south boundaries, and the boundary with 51 Wateringbury Road to the north. There is a woodland beyond the northeast corner of the site. The layout of the proposed development is not for consideration under the current outline planning application. However, the application is supported by an indicative plan that sets out how the development could be accommodated within the site. As set out in the report, the Council cannot presently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, which means that the presumption in favour of sustainable development tests set out in paragraph 11 of the NPPF fall to be applied. The detailed discussion on this is contained within the reports, but in summary, the application falls to be assessed under Part D of paragraph 11. It is considered that when assessed under the first section of Part D, the policies relate to heritage and flooding matters in this instance. As set out in detail in the report, the site cannot be considered isolated as it is in a sustainable location adjacent to the defined settlement boundary of East Malling village. It is approximately 60 metres south of the East Malling conservation area and does not abut the conservation area boundary at any point. The nearest listed building is on the other side of Wateringbury Road and is separated from the site by the existing retained vegetation, and similarly the non-listed Belvedere Oast complex would retain its agricultural setting, meaning that the impact on heritage assets, which has been fully assessed by the Council's Conservation Officer, would be reviewed as the lower end of less than substantial harm in NPPF terms. Similarly, the site is within flood zone 1 and therefore there are no restrictive policies relating to flooding on the site. For this reason, the presumption in favour of sustainable development set out in the second part of paragraph 11D re-emerges, and therefore the assessment of the application is taken within the context of the tilted planning balance. The indicative development proposed indicates buildings are approximately 2 stories in height, focused at the northern end of the site, with open space and retained orchard to the south of the existing overhead power line that crosses the site. The existing landscaping in the form of the hedgerows and shelter belts on the site are indicated as being retained and enhanced, with a 20-metre wide landscape buffer being provided around the northeastern corner of the site to mitigate the impact of the development on local wildlife. The landscape buffer would consist of dense scrub planting to restrict resident access to the area and to provide appropriate space for wildlife present in the vicinity. The nature and extent of the buffer proposed would be reassessed at the detailed planning stage, with conditions proposed in this application to require additional survey works to be undertaken to ensure that mitigation is planned into the final layout. And the condition attached to the supplementary report is there to follow that up. The site is set approximately 1 metre lower than Wateringbury Road to the west, with this change in level and the retention of the existing boundary screening reducing the overall impact of the development on the surroundings. The proposals are therefore considered capable of being accommodated within the landscape without undue levels of harm to landscape character or visual amenity. The proposed vehicular access is located in the northwestern corner of the site, 9.6 metres from the boundary with 51 Wateringbury Road, which in itself is set 12 metres from the site boundary. The access will need to be elevated above the existing site level to join Wateringbury Road. On the request of officers, the applicant has provided indicative plans that do not form part of the submission, but for information only to show how the access would sit in relation to the neighbouring property, and the slopes element would not extend past the rear wall of 51 Wateringbury Road. It also indicates that the routing of the road through the site is not fixed and would form part of the detailed submission. The plan does show that the elevational changes will not lead to a significant reduction in privacy or overlooking to the adjacent property, and any impact can be controlled through details of boundary treatment, which will be included as part of landscaping at the reserved matters stage. The access itself would see the existing speed table on Wateringbury Road enlarged and the 20-mile-an-hour speed restriction moved 10 metres to the south from its existing position. Appropriate visibility displays can be accommodated within the site, and KCC Highways, as statutory consultee, are satisfied that the position of the access and its dimensions are acceptable. They are also satisfied that the existing road network can accommodate the traffic generated by the development. The highway works would also see alterations to the existing traffic calming features in the village, with alterations to the road markings to the north. The changes to the southern traffic calming measures would change the priority of vehicles entering the village and give priority to vehicles heading south. The existing build-out would be enhanced further to slow the traffic. In conclusion, the presumption in favour of sustainable development as set out in paragraph 11D of the NPPF applies in this instance. The test in this case is whether or not there are any adverse impacts of granting planning permission that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole. The proposed development would provide a policy-compliant development of up to 52 residential dwellings. It would also provide 40% affordable housing on site, which would contribute to addressing a recognised need for affordable housing in the borough. Overall, and for reasons set out throughout the reports, it is considered that there will be no adverse impacts of granting planning permission for the development that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits that the development would bring when assessed against the policies in the framework. The proposed reasons for refusal, as set out in the full council report, are not supported as set out, and also it's pointed out that the Part 2 legal report produced by independent counsel backs this up. It is therefore recommended that outline planning permission be granted subject to the finalisation of a legal agreement securing planning obligations for affordable housing, off-site open space, education and community facilities, medical practice services, and the planning conditions set out in the main and supplementary reports, that the development comes forward in an acceptable, high-quality fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Okay, so we have, I think, 24 members of the public to speak. The first one on the list is Peter Cooling from Teston Parish Council. Are you available? If you'd like to come down, sir. Just to remind everybody, you have 3 minutes per speaker, and if members of in the public gallery could just refrain from any comments, or go ahead, sir, please refrain from any comments or any applause or anything like that, please, so we can concentrate on what we're doing. So, Mr. Cooling, you have 3 minutes, please go ahead.
I am Chairman, Teesson Parish Council, and I'm here because, if approved, this application will create yet more traffic through 3 conservation areas. East Malling with narrow, windy Chapel Street and High Street and narrow pavements, Waterbury with its air quality challenged traffic lights, and Teesson with its narrow, steep, non-pavemented Malling Road linking Teesson with Teesson Bridge. Future applications along Waterbury Road would then be encouraged, further stressing these 3 conservation areas. At the 19th of March Housing and Planning Scrutiny Select Committee, cost awards were listed against Tunbridge and Malling for unreasonable behaviour from 2021 onwards, total cost of 82k. But now with 311k against Land at Eccles to be added, increasing the total to just under 400k. Of that, 3% was when a planning committee refused while officers recommended approval, but 96% derived from delegated decisions or actions, or rather inaction, by officers. The amount spent on appeals or potential appeals between 2020 and 24, including those costs, was 599k, or 150k per annum. But that must be set against the need for the planning process to be seen to be applied fairly and enforced robustly. This is not a criticism of officers who have to judge some 2,000 applications per annum, when, if a decision is appealed, a planning inspector might then perhaps make a different subjective judgment on about 25 of those that are appealed. However, Eleanor Hoyle reported to that 19th of March Select Committee that officers have now tightened procedures so that all necessary consultations are conducted in a timely manner and statutory deadlines are not breached. Delayed consultation was critical to the Land at Eccles case and its 311k cost penalty. Presumably, officers will now assure this council that in processing this application, they have scrupulously adhered to proper process, so that even if it is now refused but then successfully appealed, the probability of any significant award of costs is slim, if not non-existent. This council should presumably now have full confidence in its officers' performance and should therefore be prepared to support Area 2 Planning Committee's recommended refusal. To ignore that recommendation is to undermine delegation, even though appealed refusals after officer approval have only given rise to some 3% of awarded costs since 2021. Not approving this application would indicate this council can be bullied by the threat of appeal. We therefore request that you give full support to your planning committee, add cumulative traffic impact to the 6 grounds for refusal in your papers, and then declare this application refused and as necessarily strongly defend at appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and spot on time. The next speaker is Joanne Smith, and after that it will be Jeffrey Kenwood. So Joanne Smith next, please.
Good evening. 3 times this application has been put before us, and 3 times our elected representatives have voted to reject it. For some inexplicable reason, we are told rejection is the wrong answer, and we need to try again. You will hear some compelling arguments as to why this application should be rejected, why it isn't a good idea to build perhaps 52 houses on a working orchard adjoining East Malling. But over and over again, you will hear it's not the right development, it's not the right place. I think most people here know shoehorning 52 houses on the edge of our village will destroy the nature of the village itself. I live in a barn which I've converted myself over the last 10 years. It's a rural building in a rural setting. If you build a housing estate opposite, it will no longer be in its proper context. So why is this proposal being applied for? Equestrian is a company which exists for the sole purpose of making profit for its shareholders. This is the stated aim of companies. This proposal is designed to return the maximum return per house brick. By siting 52 houses in the picturesque village of East Malling, they would be building houses which do not require extensive access, new infrastructures or facilities. They can simply stretch our existing ones even further. These houses will probably sell easily. Only a few minutes walk to a mainline train station. They will attract people seeking to move out of the urban sprawl of London to our pretty village. That won't help people of our borough. It will simply move new people here. Because this proposal is solely designed to make money for equestrian shareholders, it does not matter to them and is of no consequence the long-term outcome. The degradation of our village into a sprawling urban mess, the ever-expanding development of profit base in the most desirable areas, this seemingly no control of overall vision from our planners. We feel as though we are being pressurised by this planning department into accepting our heritage being stripped, our countryside being concreted over, and the character of where we live being completely lost forever. It is not just for the residents of East Malling that I ask you to reject this proposal. It's for everyone who comes through here and anyone who lives in the wider area. Even people from the most densely populated areas do not want the characters of our villages destroyed. What will be left for the generations to come? Just another suburb with walled houses. It seems that there is a fear to say no, even to a proposal as obviously wrong and out of place as this one. We hear we might get awarded costs against us if we say no. It's as if companies such as Equestrian have the right to build housing estates wherever they want, in the middle of ancient villages, with tiny, narrow streets opposite historic buildings, wherever they can make the most money. This cannot be right, and our elected representatives need to act in the best interests of the whole area and reflect the wishes of the people who will have to live with the outcome decision. Thank you.
Mr. Kenwood.
Good evening, members. Once this orchard is gone, it's gone forever. Please remember that in your deliberations. Do you really want to see housing instead of greenery? This orchard may be next to the village, but it is countryside, and orchards are what the Garden of England and East Malling are all about. The orchard is the start of that countryside and is the first evidence you can see of that garden. I'm fortunate to live in Belvedere Oast, Belvedere Farm. The name indicates the beautiful view which will be replaced by housing. This is one of 3 farms immediately beyond the conservation area. The orchard is the largest of those. The developer tells us there will be a net gain in biodiversity. How? The government guidelines say that orchards are very biodiverse and should be kept where possible. A brick, tarmac and concrete development cannot compete with what we have in this orchard. Various deer, turtle doves, little owls, nuthatch, firecrest, birds of prey, 35 bird species. It's a long list. Small mammals, shrews, field mice, moles and their predators. The pear orchard, part of the site, is stated to be biodiversity gain. How so? It's already there. The site is an essential part of the buffer betwixt Kings Hill, the quarry and developments to the east. If given permission, we shall soon see a town stretching from Kings Hill all the way to Maidstone, giving a complete loss of individuality to the villages. To make an informed judgment, you will have had a visit. Only then will you understand why that visit was necessary. If you have not seen it, how can you vote? To appreciate the site, you must try to park your car, then walk up the hill on a very narrow path. It is scary. Walk to Ivy Farm, avoiding the nettles and giant hogweed, hoping a car mirror won't swipe you. Now you can appreciate the site for what it is, a diverse rural landscape. Delve further, view where the badger's set was criminally destroyed. Walk the orchard, see the wildlife, and now understand the issues of the road and traffic above you, from the orchard and from the footpath beside you. Scattered about is a debris from multiple car collisions and thrown detritus. You will also see why access proposed is dangerous, especially when cars are parked, thus making the splay inadequate. The footpath is dangerous. KCC says too dangerous to maintain. How then can a considerable increase in its use be contemplated? In 10 years, the footpath has only been cleared twice, both recent and oddly to coincide with the planning meetings. Only once have I seen signage maintenance. The signs are then quickly obscured by plants. Please search your consciences before voting for this plan. How can it be justified that a housing estate has greater diversity than an orchard? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kenwood. Oh, spot on time. Mr. Kenwood, did you want to read out your statement for your... Mr. Kenwood? Oh, so... Excellent. Thank you very much, madam. If you'd like to come over.
Good evening. Once more, we've heard about the so-called threat of appeal, but let's look at the evidence. The average constituency bins the MBC is only 7,500, not the hundreds of thousands of which members have been informed. The applicant has submitted 13 appeals and has lost 10. That's not a threat, that's a pattern of failure. The Planning Inspectorate supports councils when refusals are clear and policy-based, and this is just such a case. The application proposes development on a productive orchard, a site that has served the community for centuries. It is not derelict or surplus land, it's part of our national and agricultural heritage. Paragraph 174 of the NPPF makes it clear planning should recognise the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside and the economic and other benefits of best and most versatile agricultural land. This orchard is also home to a resident badger set under paragraph 180 of the NPPF. Planning decisions should protect and enhance biodiversity, ensuring harm to protected species is avoided and refused where significant harm cannot be mitigated. The site forms part of the setting of listed buildings. In paragraph 208 of the NPPF states that great weight must be given to the conservation of heritage assets, including their setting. Approving this scheme would irreversibly damage that setting, something the Inspectorate takes very seriously. And perhaps most strikingly, the applicant proposes a raised access road running the entire length of the neighbouring property, severely impacting the privacy and amenity of the existing residents. Paragraph 130F of the NPPF requires development to create places with a high standard of amenity for existing and future users. This proposal does the opposite. Chair, members, this application fails on policy grounds, environmental, historical and social. To approve it, would be to ignore the NPPF and the lived experience of neighbours and the clear planning history of an applicant who has repeatedly failed to convince the planning inspectorate. There is no genuine threat of appeal here, only a threat to our heritage, our wildlife and our residents' well-being. You have both the evidence and the policy support to refuse this application with confidence. Please do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Mark Stewart. And after Mr. Stewart is Catherine Moore. So, Mr. Stewart, 3 minutes when you're ready.
I've been to many planning applications lately. They all seem to follow a similar theme. This Ivy Farm one just seems to be another in the list of listen, ignore, approve and build. There are many perfectly acceptable reasons that you are here as to why this proposal should be rejected. Heritage, environmental impact, sustainability, infrastructure, loss of agricultural land and amenity. But yet again, all these legitimate arguments are generally ignored. I must ask you, the councillors who they think are representing, it certainly doesn't seem to be the electorate that took the decision to vote for you. People sitting quietly over there are the same people that voted you into office. You are absolutely not representing them. If this is the case, then what is even the point of you being here? All these people are here protesting against the proposal. I certainly don't see anybody here, apart from the developers, here to support it. No one doubts the need for housing, but this most definitely is not the answer. Ivy Farm is just as convenient as was Clare Lane for mass housing building, so that box can be ticked off. The ugly, soulless development of Winterfield Lane should be a reminder of what is being proposed. Is this really the best we can do, or is it just the easier option to reach quotas set out by the government? Ivy Farm is a beautiful area rich in biodiversity and natural heritage asset and productive in its current state. The legacy you will leave for East Malling because you as councillors don't have the will to stand up to the greed of developers and say enough is enough. The planners probably do not even live in the area, so their interest in any particular area of objection is mute. If the Secretary of State overrules on yet another appeal, you can at least say we tried for the people of the village, not we capitulated to the will of national policy because it was the easier, safer option. I remember one councillor on the recent Clare Lane proposal said, well, this is how democracy works. Well, I ask you now to prove it, being the overwhelming majority of people in East Malling do not want this development. The true irony being that that said councillor has a similar development in his own backyard, but apparently is vehemently opposed to mass development there. The hypocrisy is palpable. I ask you again, who are you representing? The people who empowered you or the developers and the planners? If it's the uncomfortable truth you don't like, then this council is not fit for purpose. You don't have to approve the Ivy Farm development for all the reasons given, as the case against it far outweighs any possible benefit. The people you supposedly represent have suffered enough from fighting this. Some of the councillors here fight hard for their community, and I totally applaud their efforts. And I'm asking you to do the same on this occasion. Respect what the local community has empowered you to do and reject this proposal. If you truly follow democracy, then you know what to do. Remember, you're only sitting here because we allow you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Catherine Moore, please.
Good evening, councillors. While I will briefly reference planning considerations, my principal concern is the lawfulness and transparency of this process, central to public interest and protected under UK law and international agreements. Under the Local Government Act of 1972 and Localism Act 2011, accountability lies with those elected. No internal procedure, no constitutional clause can remove that duty. If officers fail to meet their obligations, they should be reviewed and, if necessary, replaced. It is deeply concerning that councillors are being pressured by warnings of substantial risk or potential costs without the public having access to the legal advice underpinning these claims. The openness of local government bodies regulations 2014 gives the public the right to access any reports or legal reasoning materially informing decisions. That information remains unpublished. Under the Aarhus Convention, which the UK remains a party to, residents have the right to participate in environmental decision-making and access all relevant information. Proceeding without this may breach both UK and international legal obligations. And to be clear, risk of costs is not a lawful planning consideration under the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act of 2004. Decisions must be based on the development plan and sound planning grounds, not speculative threats or internal warnings. An ombudsman complaint or judicial review would cost the council far more in the long run than simply defending a standard developer appeal. Councillors are also bound by the Nolan principles: selflessness, accountability, objectivity and openness. If you vote under pressure, guided by advice you haven't seen, you may breach those principles whether you realise it or not. Let me also highlight one specific issue. The ecological survey was conducted at a time unlikely to accurately assess protected species like bats and badgers, raising serious concerns under the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act 2006 and wildlife legislation. Kent Council have admitted in response to Freedom of Information requests that they do not hold a local breakdown of housing need, data which is legally required to justify the so-called housing crisis used as a blanket excuse for approving developments. In its absence, residents' voices, environmental protections and even legal obligations are being ignored, yet this application moves forward as though refusal is no longer even considered a lawful option. I urge you to reject this application, not because we oppose development, but because the process has strayed too far from law, too far from transparency, and too far from the public you were elected to represent. If you proceed tonight under opaque advice, flawed process, and officer-led pressure, please understand the consequences may not end with this vote. They may begin with it. Thank you.
Okay, got Eliza Peacock next, please. You got Eliza Peacock. Thank you. And after is Natasha Allen.
Good evening. I'm here to talk on behalf of the Nettlestead and Waterbury residents who will be affected by this development. Because of the height and width restrictions at the railway bridge in East Malling, all construction traffic would have to come through Waterbury and Teston. Waterbury Crossroads is already a heavily congested junction, so congested in fact that Tunbridge and Malling Council found it to have the worst air quality in the whole borough in their 2024 audit. The NBC have been in breach of legal limits for nitrogen dioxide since targets were introduced in 2010, declaring the Crossroads an air quality management area. We have an air quality garden, which received funding during lockdown in recognition of this, which consists of a few hanging plants and one flower bed, which looks very pretty and we're grateful for anything, don't get me wrong, but it's had zero impact on air quality and nitrogen dioxide is deadly. It affects us all, but especially those with chronic heart and lung conditions like asthma, conditions that affect the most vulnerable among us, children and the elderly, of which we have many in our 2 villages. When I leafleted to make people aware of these plans, lots of the older residents told me of their concerns and expressed their sadness they are not online to oppose this build. There are 2 bus stops at the Crossroads where kids get the bus to school and many elderly residents catch the bus into town. So potentially the 2 most vulnerable groups in our community are about to be hit by even higher levels of pollution. It's predicted this and the other new developments in East Malling will bring an additional 100,000 traffic movements through our village. I don't even know how this development could be considered and how this wasn't immediately refused on these grounds alone. Can you imagine what the levels will be like if all the developments in our area get the green light? From my understanding, it's because of a lack of a local plan in East Malling and its location in the Medway strategic gap, but to make the most vulnerable members of society pay for this bad management seems outrageous. And to the developers, I would say you've had a good run here. You've got 4 developments through in a tiny, beautiful village. That's 800 houses. I think enough is enough now. If the build at Braybourne Fields and this one at Ivy Farm are approved, that would be another 1,400 houses. You really need to think about the people you are affecting. These houses are not even helping local people get off the housing list. They're selling for enormous amounts and out of reach for most local. There are also no plans to fund more doctor surgeries or hospitals. My partner has heart failure. If he has an issue in the night and needs to talk to a doctor via an emergency appointment, it takes him about half an hour to get through. And in my experience and talking to neighbours, the average wait time to get even a telephone appointment is 3 weeks. We can't absorb all the new people these developments will bring. We just do not have the infrastructure. We also currently have 2 bills either side of Kent Street on the approach to Kings Hill, which is impacting traffic on the Tunbridge Road. For those travelling to Tunbridge, Kings Hill, Snodland and the motorways beyond. If Ivy Farm gets the go-ahead, we're literally going to be gridlocked at peak time. You might think it's okay for people to have to leave 45 minutes to an hour earlier to ensure they get to work on time, but we don't. This build is just one step too far. The repercussions will be unbearable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Natasha Allen is next, followed by Jason Allen, please.
Good evening. Our family home is right next door to this proposed development site and sadly for us, immediately next to the proposed access road. We are not objecting to our loss of view. We are objecting to our loss of privacy due to overlooking caused by the raised access road. This piece of land was a blank canvas. The access road could have gone anywhere, and yet the developer and planners have decided the best place for it is right alongside our boundary, where it will run like a bridge, 1.5 metres above our garden and over a foot above the top of our fence. Pedestrian head height on the access path is almost 10 feet above the level of our garden and will enable them to look into the full height windows that overlook the site and the entirety of our back garden. Vehicles will have a similar or higher outlook. The loss of enjoyment of our patio and private garden spaces, light pollution and invasion of privacy are totally preventable, disproportionately severe, and will have a permanent and profoundly detrimental impact on our mental health and our quality of life. Our children have already said they won't want to use their garden because their every move will be seen by strangers. How can we feel relaxed and secure knowing we are on full public display from this road and pathway that will loom over our property? Would you want it next to your house? As in the case of Fern versus Tate 23, the Supreme Court ruled that overlooking by strangers constitutes a legal nuisance and a violation of privacy that interferes with residents' rights of privacy under Article 8 of the 98 Human Rights Act. Officers have continually tried to downplay our loss of privacy by incorrectly stating we do not have south-facing windows and saying that our garden is large. The access road is 9 metres from our garden and 21 metres from our house and windows. The distance in the Supreme Court ruling was 34. Overlooking from the road will be day and night forever. Lights from vehicles entering and exiting will strobe and shine into the front, side and rear bedroom windows. Our autistic son is triggered by light disturbance and his rear bedroom will be directly affected. The additional air, light and noise pollution will have a profoundly negative impact on the enjoyment of our home, and this constant and permanent visual intrusion is a severe infringement of our rights of privacy and constitutes a clear statutory nuisance. We have raised funds and taken legal advice as part of a group of residents, and I would therefore ask you to include the risk of judicial review under the Owl House Convention in your deliberations and not just the potential risk of developer appeal costs. As the objections raised against this development are all material planning considerations, we respectfully urge you to carefully consider the impact of this development on our heritage, rural farmland identity, wildlife, and on the villagers who will have to live with the consequences forevermore. Thank you.
Jason Allen, please.
We live at number 51, directly north of Ivy Farm. The site is an orchard and has been for hundreds of years. It is not a brownfield site or an empty field. It is a local provider of pears, bramley and dessert apples and continues to be farmed today. It is habitat to all manner of wildlife, including protected species. We have a legal right of vehicle access over the orchard to maintain and renew our boundary. Approving this application would knowingly result in obstruction and conflict. It is totally unreasonable to approve a scheme that would leave neighbours to fight it out later in court. That is poor planning and poor governance. Our boundary consists of a 4-foot-high wire stock fence, in keeping with its rural setting. The orchard is higher than our garden, and Wateringbury Road is 1.5 metres higher than the orchard. The raised access road will be 12 inches above the top of our fence and run down the length of our private back garden. Officers and consultees have based their recommendations on false information. The LVIA states that our property does not have south-facing windows. This is completely untrue. But officers are deliberately blocking a site visit to ensure you cannot see this for yourself. We have full-height ground and first floor south and east-facing windows overlooking the entire orchard. As TNBC do not scrutinise applications, this crucial point has been missed, and even though we have made officers aware of this, the report before you tonight still remains incorrect. It is also silent on the level of harm to our property, which is shown in the LVIA as high even after 15 years. Why has there been a systematic attempt by officers to hide the devastating harm to the enjoyment of our home? Approval would result in the total loss of privacy in our garden and our home. We are also extremely concerned about our security. How would you like strangers looking over your fence, watching your children and grandchildren while they play in their own private back garden? Any opportunistic thief could scope out our home, our garage, our pets, and even everything else currently we have in our garden. There are no conditions in the officer's recommendations to provide a permanent barrier to prevent unwanted observers or visitors. There is a total lack of consideration for our privacy, security and amenity, and it fails to comply with paragraph 130F of the MPPF. Why aren't officers recommending a 3-metre high fence like they did at the Cold Harbour roundabout to provide privacy to the travellers' site 80 metres from the road? Are we not entitled to privacy? The Supreme Court says we are. Officers have removed our rights to erect our own fence, as they say it will have a detrimental effect on the setting of the rural locality. Why then are they recommending the total destruction of the rural setting itself?
And Francis Saunders next, please, followed by Catherine Jordan.
Good evening. I want to start by informing members of what took place in the Ivy Farm orchard 2 months prior to this planning application being submitted. A badger set that had existed there peacefully for decades was illegally levelled. This set straddled the boundary between the orchard and an adjacent woodland. In the orchard, the set was flattened with heavy machinery, exposed holes were infilled with earth, and traffic cones put into openings. Subsequent to this, when this application was submitted, the ecology report stated there were no badgers on the site. This was despite Kent Police instructing the applicant to update their ecology report prior to submission, which did not happen. 3 years have passed since then, and you will be pleased to hear that the badgers are re-establishing the destroyed part of their set. In fact, they have been so busy, they have now excavated 8 set entrances in the orchard. But something is afoot. Having survived a criminal attack on their set, the badgers are now facing a much bigger threat. A planning department happy to support the developer's pretense that the badgers are not there. A recent ICO ruling against FOI non-disclosure finally released information just yesterday that collaborated that the committee was misled by the head of planning at the September Area 2 Planning Committee. When the committee was informed that Natural England had reviewed and accepted the developer's proposals, this was false information. An email from Natural England shared this morning with members confirms no badger mitigation information was ever sent to Natural England by TNBC. When the committee was informed that there is a 20-metre buffer to protect the badger set and the badgers were, quote, protected well within the woodland, this was also false information because the badgers have excavated 10 metres into that said buffer, making the buffer just a mere 10 metres. In fact, 30 metres is the normal protections given, which the KCC ecologist has confirmed to planning officials, and this proposal puts the badger set dangerously close to the main access road. And finally, when the committee were told that the set entrances in the orchard are outliers and not in use, this was also fabricated because the ECC ecologist has stated that she believes the set entrances in the orchard are connected to the woodland entrances. Members should note that it is not possible to close the set as the woodland part is owned by a neighbour's son. It is crystal clear what will happen if the set entrances are closed under licence, as this has already been attempted illegally. The badgers will dig back out, they are fiercely territorial and have no consideration of human boundaries. It is extremely important for members to note that given the gradient of the land, once access has been approved, which is not a reserve matter, it is unlikely that a bigger buffer could be achieved. Plain and simple, this road is in the wrong place. There has been almost 3 years to achieve avoidance of the set in line with Natural England's guidance for LPAs, but planning officials have been happy to accept substandard proposals rather than complying with the law. As Councillor Tatton stated in September, this was a blank canvas and it is inexcusable that insufficient mitigations has been given for the badgers. I would therefore urge members to support her view and reject this application this evening.
Catherine Jordan next, please.
Historic England's Guidance Note 3 is very helpful in simplifying conservation principles. The question is, what matters and why? So what is it about the conservation area of East Malling that's important and worth preserving? The medieval street pattern and historic buildings give us an insight into the past lives of residents, whilst the surrounding countryside and farmsteads provide the background to the rural settlement. The village has changed much in the last century, with expansion to the north and west. Rural area to the south provides the last link to its agricultural past and offers context for the farmsteads of Ivy Farmhouse, Huntley's Cottage and the buildings of Belvedere Oast. The conservation area appraisal states on page 19 that the rural landscape surrounding the conservation area should be maintained. The construction of 52 new homes and their infrastructure will urbanise this setting, therefore causing harm to the heritage assets. As there isn't a local plan and TNBC cannot demonstrate a housing supply, the applicant is confident that this development will provide sufficient public benefit to offset this harm. However, East Malling Parish Council contends that additional harm will be inflicted as a result of increased traffic. Historic England's guidance says that as well as the historic buildings and features of a village, significance can be derived from the feel and sense of place, which allows one to appreciate the past. Guidance notes state that this experience can be impacted by noise, dust, and vibration, and that disruption as a result of traffic can negatively affect the ability to appreciate the character and appearance of a conservation area. The village already suffers from severe traffic pressure. Frequent vehicle collisions cause damage to buildings and walls and therefore directly harm the listed buildings. There's an absolute correlation between the increased damage and increased traffic. The historic single lane of Wateringbury Road cannot accommodate any additional congestion arising from the extra 100,000 vehicle movements a year for this scheme alone. This is on top of potentially 1 million additional traffic movements from the approved schemes at New Road, Clare Lane and 40 acres. This development will cause significant adverse harm to the listed buildings, character and appearance of East Malling Conservation Area. I would ask the committee to afford great weight to the preservation of these heritage assets in accordance with the 1990 Act and the NPPF.
Thank you very much. Stephen Lockett next, please, followed by Philip Jordan.
Okay. Good evening. I feel that our historic village is under siege, with around 500 houses already built or approved, together with the possibility of 1,300 more between us and Ditton. I was heartened to see that a very similar application in Thanet that went to appeal was recently rejected by the planning inspector. Thanet also cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply. The site is in Foxborough Lane, is on farmland in the edge of Minster. Knowing the area well, it has a much quieter road system compared to that of East Malling. Inspector David Wallace rejected the appeal. I quote, "The proposal would give rise to intensification of pedestrian movements, increasing the probability of an accident. It is not a busy cut through like East Malling. Also, it does not have the commercial traffic flow we experience, mainly from Amazon, DHL, etc., coming from New Hive and Panettone. They use it as a shortcut to cut through, travel south rather than use the Kings Hill bypass. The only pedestrian access from this site is via Chapel Street. Pavement is on one side, which has many points, at many points is between 70 and 80 centimetres wide, with obstructions from street furniture. This is almost half KCC's requirement of 1,500 centimetres and 1,200 under the Disability Discrimination Act. A typical van's mirror projects around 25 centimetres, leaving little or no room clear for pedestrians. This makes it particularly dangerous for those with children, pushchairs or mobility issues. For example, on the 18th of February, a schoolgirl was injured by a van whilst walking along the pavement. The van did not stop. This was reported to the police. As mentioned by others, there's numerous accidents and damage. In addition, pedestrian access is usually hindered by vehicles that are parked on the pavement. There is no possibility to widen this road or improve the pavement. It is narrow, just passable for 2 cars, but for vans and lorries to pass, they mount the pavement. This application would definitely increase the pedestrian movements and risk of accidents, just as determined in Thanet. The inspector's other grounds were, I quote, "The development would harm character and appearance of the landscape." In summing up, he said, "For these reasons, the harm of the proposed development would outweigh the benefits." This can also apply in East Malling, so it is possible to win a potential appeal. Surely the planning inspector's rejection in Thanet sets a precedent. It is possible to win. I would also like to thank the councillors that previously voted against this development and hope it will be refused once again tonight. Thank you.
Jordan next.
Squire's representative will probably be telling you later what a wonderful multi-award winning SME house builder they are. A developer whose website proudly states, "We understand the harmful effects of car travel to the environment, so we encourage a greener and cleaner approach, and often look to improve public transport options and providing alternative use to car where appropriate." If this were true, and given the obvious and significant detrimental impact this site would have on East Malling's sustainability, ecology, heritage and privacy rights, they would never have considered building here in the first place. If, however, this is just about profits, TMBC planning should have identified this as a no-go development at the early stages of the application. At the Area 2 Planning Committee meeting in February this year, clearly irked at having to appear at 3 previous meetings, Mr. Wilford, Squire's head of planning, stated, "The committee is not prepared to support the silent majority, part of its community in greatest needs. That's the future generation." Over recent years, this committee has approved 810 houses in East Malling, 1,300 in planning determination. This very much disproves this statement.
He further declared this committee is failing current and future generations to protect the few that shout the loudest. Again, the facts state otherwise. If you consider that at least 60 locals attended 3 Area 2 planning meetings in objection to this development, this is not a few wanting personal protection. This represents a majority wanting to protect this historic village. At the same meeting, Mr. Wilford proclaimed, "This committee is part of the problem and not the solution." Direct attack on our democratic elected members. He said, "Members, you have a choice tonight. Be part of the problem or be part of the solution and help those most in need." I think everybody knows Esquires aren't interested in helping those in need. Their true motive is protecting profits, even if this means ignoring their own ethos. Protecting profits over protecting the intrinsic values of East Malling Village. Values which once gone are gone forever. I urge you to consider all the facts that have been passionately presented tonight and ask yourself, is this honestly the right development in the right place?
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Got Fiona Reynolds next, please. Okay, so Fiona Reynolds doesn't appear to be here, so we'll move on to the next on the list, which is Mark Crowcroft. Thank you.
Good evening. Me and my wife are the proud owners of Grade 2 listed farmhouse Uncle Cottage, located directly opposite the proposed site. Our house has been repeatedly quoted and by the applicant's report as being key to the development and yet completely unaffected by it. I'm here to make perfectly clear that this is simply not true and voice our strong opposition to this proposed planning application. Our house was built in the early 1600s, and I think it's worthwhile to put this in a sense of perspective. It was built roughly at the times of James I and Oliver Cromwell. Shakespeare had just passed away at 1616, and the Gunpowder Plot was 1605. And of course, the Great Fire of London in 1666. For the last 400 years, every plan of this area has included our home in one form or another, and the stunning surrounding orchards, fields, woods, and now in danger of looking out on a housing estate. The word heritage is important too, relating to things of historical or cultural value that are worthy of preservation. Architectural heritage provides a tangible link to history and allows us to understand and appreciate the achievements and values and lifestyles of the past. Firstly, our farmhouse is not just merely a residence, it's a living testament to our rich history and cultured heritage. For centuries, it has stood as a symbol of our past, reflecting on the architectural styles and craftsmanship of bygone years. The construction of a large housing estate in such close proximity will undermine the historical integrity and significance of this cherished landmark. Increased traffic, noise, pollution, and will disrupt the serene environment that is preserved for generations. Secondly, the visual impact on the proposed development cannot be understated. The farmhouse, with its unique architectural features and historical value, is a cornerstone in our community's character and charm. The introduction of modern housing structure will create a jarring contrast, diminishing the aesthetic appeal and the historical context of the area. The visual intrusion will not only affect the farmhouse, but also the natural balance of our village. In conclusion, the proposed housing estate will have a profoundly negative effect on our home and community. It threatens our heritage, disrupts the visual environment landscape, and places undue strain on our infrastructure. Can you comfortably sit here and say in 10 years' time that we will have this pride in where we live and the pride in our contribution in maintaining what Kent stands for, with all its qualities that so many people admire? You are responsible for protecting our heritage and maintaining its lasting legacy. Are we going to be the last generation to remember this as a historical place of beauty, or are commercial gains going to make us blind to what we have and how lucky we are? As it was said in all the planning meetings, this proposal is a wrong development in the wrong place. This simply is not based on heritage aspect. It fundamentally will not work. And if it goes ahead, you cannot be reversed. Nothing will be the same again. I urge you to consider this application and prioritise the preservation of our historical cultural assets. Huntley Cottage, our 400-year-old home, will be affected, and we cannot stress how strongly we oppose this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've got Andy Stevenson, but I think that's going to be read out by Francis Saunders. Is that correct? Please come over. Thank you.
Watermead Crossroads is a hotspot for poor air quality. Yeah. Okay. Hello? Okay. Okay. Waterbury Crossroads is a hotspot for poor air quality. TNB stated in their last air quality report that this busy junction has the worst air quality in the whole borough. This council has consistently been in breach of air pollution nitrogen dioxide level legal limits since 2010 at Waterbury and have a statutory duty to work to reduce this pollutant within legal limits. In the UK, it is estimated that up to 416,000 life years are lost as a result of this deadly pollutant. This figure is taken from your council's own air quality action plan. I would ask members to consider the seriousness of this duty of care, given the risk to constituents' health and lives. So why is this context important? If the proposed development is approved and built, then it would access onto Waterbury Road. There is a clue in the name as to where this road ends. It is the main route connecting East Malling and Waterbury. It leads directly to the crossroads and the aforementioned air quality hotspot. When exiting the new housing estate, the driver will have two choices: turn right into the heavily congested conservation area of East Malling, or left to the equally congested and poor air quality hotspot of Waterbury Crossroads. The developer in their submission has estimated that at peak hours from a 52 property estate, just 4 traffic movements will be generated through the Waterbury Crossroads. And according to their modelling and biased crystal ball, the vast majority would conveniently decide to turn right into East Malling rather than left to Waterbury. My family live in close proximity on Waterbury Road and have the very same decision to make every day when pulling out of our drive. And I can tell you that during peak times, we turn left towards Waterbury and use the Tunbridge Road. East Malling leading to the A20 is just too congested, made worse by TNB's decision to allow so many new developments in this area. Our single home alone could generate those 4 traffic movements, just taking school and work trips into account. Common sense should tell the committee that these numbers are clearly flawed and devolved of any reality. If just one house is generating those movements, how can 52 houses do the same? There is the potential of 1,900 houses planned for East Malling that are in some stage of planning that will be filtering out onto the local roads. Given that most of these houses were not within the previous draft plan, it is really important to consider that TNBC have not assessed the accumulative effect of all this housing on the air quality at Waterbury. All the evidence is based on the previous local plan, which did not include such a high volume of housing in East Malling. Despite this, significant new housing proposals for East Malling have been approved without reviewing this accumulative impact to air quality and residents' health. Policy LP20 in the draft local plan states that any development that either individually or accumulatively could significantly impact on air quality should be refused. There are many reasons to reject this application, but the impact of constituents' health must clearly sit at the very top of that list. Surely you cannot put a value on people's health and well-being.
Okay, I've got about half an hour more of speakers, so would members like to take a 5 to 10 minute break now? Okay, so we're just going to pause the meeting for the next, say, up to 10 minutes, but let's try and make it as quick as we can.
Testing the mic, Rob. It's testing, 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 testing. 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 Testing for the committee room. Is that okay, Rob? Is that loud enough? Let us know, Rob, if that's loud enough for you. Okay, thank you.
One, two, three, testing. One, two, three, testing.
Okay, members, I think everybody's back. If you can take your seats, please. Okay, members, thank you very much. Are we ready to resume the meeting? So, Okay, so we'll resume the planning committee meeting now. So next on the list is Yvonne Moss. If you're here, please.
Good evening. I object to this application on the grounds of highway safety due to increased traffic, damage to nearby heritage. I've lived in East Malling High Street for 25 years, in a late 16th century timber-framed Grade 2 listed farmhouse, which directly fronts the road. There's no protection from the traffic other than a single bollard, so there's no pavement, no wall, no garden. The traffic is incredibly close to the house, which has now been hit several times. The last vehicle coming directly through the wall of our house into our dining room. Since then, we feel unsafe using this room, for fear of the same happening due to the speed, volume, and close proximity of the traffic. The volume of traffic has increased horrendously since, due to local developments including Hermitage Lane, Kings Hill, and future traffic generated from developments such as 40 Acres, the Sweetings, and Clare Lane will further increase this. As Hermitage Lane and the A228 are often congested, traffic uses the narrow width restricted roads of East Malling, such as the High Street and Chapel Street, as an alternative to travel between the A20 and the A26, with little or no regard to the speed limit or the heritage assets along this route. The overhanging roof of our listed building has been damaged by large vehicles driving too close to the house. I have recently carried out my own traffic counts in the High Street, and there have been between 700 to 800 vehicles an hour travelling up and down the road during rush hour periods with long tailbacks. ACC have informed me that to install scaffolding at the front of our house for repair work, because the High Street is a designated traffic sensitive street and the road layout, I need to implement a full road closure, something I cannot possibly afford and proves that the road is unsuitable for further traffic. Planning Act 1990 places a duty on local authorities in their planning functions to pay special attention to preserving the character or appearance of the conservation areas and listed building. This application goes against this. Other safety issues are the narrow or lack of pavement, only 2 to 3 feet wide in some parts. There's no pavement outside our house or any houses on the right side as you travel up the road along Chapel Street towards the Waterbury Road. To post anything through our letterbox, you have to walk in the road, which is very dangerous. Being forced to cross the road to the narrow pavement opposite can be risky, and it is not wide enough for 2 people to walk safely side by side or past one another without the risk of being hit by traffic. Most of the traffic from Ivy Farm would be using Chapel Street and the High Street to travel towards the shops and medical facilities, and therefore exacerbate the risk of damage to heritage assets and personnel. Many of the listed buildings along the High Street and Chapel Street will be affected by this development, and they are not £1 million properties as implied by the developer, but small cottages whose residents care about protecting our country's heritage assets for future generations. I urge you to reject this application.
Okay, so next on the list, I have Sharon Page, but I think we've got a statement to be read out by Martin Bagley. Is that correct? Lisa.
Yeah, cool. Good evening, members. The proposed development of 52 houses on land to the south of East Malling Village would have a profound and irreversible impact on the village's historical and rural character. East Malling has had a long-standing association with the fruit industry, and this land plays a vital role in maintaining the village's identity, heritage, and connection to its agricultural roots. Historically, East Malling was surrounded by Kentish orchards, contributing to the village's rural setting. Over time, housing estates have encroached upon this landscape, eroding the rural nature of the area. The land to the south of the village, where the proposed development is located, is one of the last remaining expanses of open agricultural land that contributes positively to the setting of the East Malling Conservation Area. Developing this site would destroy the rural backdrop that has defined the village and its historic core for centuries. The significance of this open land is not merely visual, but also historical. The East Malling Conservation Area assessment recognises that the agricultural land contributes to the open, rural character that defines the area. If this land was developed, it would undermine the character and disrupt the landscape that has supported the village for generations. In addition to the loss of rural landscape, the proposed development would severely affect the village's historic built environment. The increase from traffic from an additional 100,000 vehicle movements per year would negatively impact the village's heritage assets. The increase in noise, vibration, fumes and traffic load on the narrow single-track road leading into the village would harm both the character and appearance of the conservation area. This would not only be detrimental to the aesthetics, but also the preservation of East Malling's historical structures, such as Huntley Cottage, Ivy House Farmhouse and Belvedere Oast, plus other Grade 2 listed properties. Furthermore, the development would compromise the village's rural gateway, particularly near these heritage assets. The loss of green space, trees and countryside in favour of housing estates would result in the destruction of essential aspects of East Malling's identity. In conclusion, the development of these 52 houses would irreparably damage the unique historical, cultural and environmental value of East Malling. It would disrupt the connection between the village and its agricultural heritage, degrade its conservation area and harm the surrounding heritage properties. The need for more housing should not come at the cost of the community's heritage and rural character. I strongly urge this development be reconsidered with the preservation of East Malling's heritage and landscape as the top priority. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Next we have Steve Brett, and following that, Martin Bagley again.
Good evening, everyone. It's hard to believe that anyone who's driven, cycled or walked into East Malling along Wateringbury Road and Chapel Street could possibly support the building of 52 houses in the adjacent orchard. The NPPF requirement to focus on development locations which are or can be made sustainable would not be met. There is no genuine choice of transport modes for any but the most able-bodied without young children. KCC Highways said, the site is only served by an infrequent range of services, even at peak times. It is therefore considered that sustainable transport will have a limited role in meeting the development's travel demands. Of the footpath leading into East Malling, they said the footway is below desirable widths and its narrow width will to some extent discourage pedestrian trips. These are all understatements. My neighbours have illustrated in detail the extremely narrow footpath and inadequate road that would have to be used by new residents. I'm reasonably able-bodied and I try to avoid walking down Chapel Street, especially at busy times or on bin collection days. At the narrowest point, as you approach the junction with Rocks Road, passing cars and pedestrians are all squeezed together, and it feels like there is a real risk of being clipped by a wing mirror. The width is limited by a house in the conservation area, and there is no reasonable mitigating action. The protective roadside bollards at this point have suffered multiple collisions and been repaired with sticky tape. Sometimes the building themselves are struck. There is no limiting of the need to travel, as there are very few local amenities. The nearest shop is over a mile away from the proposed development and closer to Larkfield than East Malling Village. In the latest report from TNBC's planning officer, he examines and dismisses each of the grounds cited for rejecting the proposed development at the last Area 2 planning meeting. Several of these dismissals are quite cursory. For example, on sustainability, he says, the siting and the proximity to the railway station are factors that contribute to the sustainability of the site, and as such, the reason would be difficult to defend in this instance. This analysis completely ignores the KCC Highways concerns about the footpath and infrequent services and fails to take account of the 39 steps leading to each of the station's platforms. The report also fails to consider the combined effects of the 6 stated grounds when there is established precedent for the cumulative effect of several less than substantial harms to be accepted as valid grounds for rejection. Thank you.
Okay, next on the list is Martin Bagley again, please. Who's actually speaking for yourself on this occasion, yeah?
Hello again. Is this the right site for development? The answer is a resounding no, and for many reasons. Cumulative increase in traffic, resulting in an unsustainable impact on an already saturated historic narrow road network. This will undoubtedly increase the risk to all users, whether they're in a vehicle, on a cycle, or worse still, on foot. Inappropriate development poses a real threat to the Air Quality Action Plan, which was produced as part of TMBC's statutory duties required by the Local Air Quality Management Framework. This inappropriate development, with the additional 100,000 vehicle journeys per year, would have a significantly negative effect on nearby areas, noting Wateringbury, already highlighted as an area with unacceptable nitrogen dioxide levels. 3. Negative effect on biodiversity. Simply put, there would be a reduction in biodiversity. There can be no biodiversity net gain by destroying an established orchard and creating a housing estate. Terminal strain on infrastructure. NHS doctor and dental services at East Malling are currently hugely overstretched. It's almost impossible to get signed on as an NHS dental patient and increasingly difficult to beat the keyboard athletes to get a doctor's appointment. West Malling Group practice is currently rated at 2.3 stars from 73 reviews on Google. Despite the best efforts of the dedicated and committed staff, this is almost entirely down to demand versus available resources. These services are under siege with increased demand. For centuries, East Malling has been intrinsically linked to the fertile land. In the early 20th century, it cemented a place in history with the establishment of East Malling Research Station, now known as NIAB EMR. Globally renowned research culminated in a series of rootstocks that were even named after the village. East Malling's heritage was subsequently forged and therefore created a distinct identity. This inappropriate development would erode the character of the site and be irrevocably damaging to the visual amenity. I urge you to hear your constituents' substantiated grounds to reject this application for the sake of the environment, the visual character of the village, and arrest the intensification of urbanisation of East Malling. Once again, I ask, is this the right site for development? Thank you.
And next on the list is Mark Harge, but I think that's going to be read out by Christine Woodger.
Good evening. At the 3 Area 2 planning meetings, Mark quoted the facts relating to the non-sustainability of this proposed development, specifically the non-existent local amenities and public transport services, narrow and dangerous pedestrian footpaths, and the existing significant issues relating to traffic and road safety. The impact on each of these has either been misrepresented within the developer's proposal, conveniently overlooked, or policy as used as a screen to ignore facts. Most members should have received email images on Friday that provide the physical proof on many of these facts, but the key ones are: the footpaths are just 53 centimetres wide in places, not 100 centimetres as quoted. Due to pavement parking and vehicles constantly mounting them to allow southbound vehicles to pass, they are impossible to all but the able and even then with extreme caution. To the centre line, the road is just 195 centimetres in places, significantly narrower than ambulances, rubbish trucks, delivery vans, etc. There are no cycle paths in the area, not numerous, as quoted. There's just one bus a week, not one an hour, Monday to Friday, and 4 on Saturdays, as quoted. One a week. Yes, there's an hourly train service in each direction, but due to the 39 steps, it's only accessible to the able-bodied and those without children. There are 2 schools, a pub, and a convenience store a mile away. Except for the pub, a car is required to access the others. The data input to profile the current traffic was substantially wrong. The AM and PM peak periods were wrong by over an hour each. Of the 32 UK sites used in the trip analysis, Drix filter, only 2 were in the southeast and 1 in Kent. The date range was between 2013 and 2018, after 12 years old. This development will generate 100,000 additional traffic movements, not less than 1 per house per day as quoted. A minimum of 14 serious accidents over recent years have occurred within just 480 metres of the proposed entrance, one of which was a fatality. These accidents are on top of the 6 minor ones quoted by the developer, numerous others we don't have photographic evidence of, and the countless door mirror removals and scrapes. And not forget the recent schoolgirl hit and injured by a van mounting the southbound pavement. Please refuse this application. Yeah.
Okay, next on the list is Gary James, followed by Becky Prince, and that's going to be read out by Jason Allen.
Heartbeat, Doc Martin, Beyond Paradise are very popular, quirky, small-town British TV dramas. For an hour, viewers are transported from their living rooms to places that you might visit for a day, go on holiday to, or where you might dream of living. Those shows reassure folk that beyond the city limits, places like that exist. Less densely populated areas with community, open space, and close proximity to nature. They speak to the psyche of a nation by saying, this is our England, this is what we have. What we do not have are mountains to rival Switzerland, nor the exotic wildlife that you would find in Australia or Californian beaches, and neither can you clamber into a jeep and go on safari. What we do have is right under our nose and being debated tonight. The very attributes that define this place, our place, everyone in this room's place, are the hedgerows, the patchwork of farm fields, the lanes, the streams, the stiles, the orchards, the shadows, the smaller wildlife, the villages clustered around a church. Everything that can be found around here. Yet all that, the very DNA of our island home, is under constant attack as field by field land is given up to housing developments, each one conveniently touted as the right houses in the right place. The residents of East Malling lose sleep these days, living under a constant cloud of anxiety of what is to become of their home. It feels like battleground tactics, encircled and encroached from all sides by identikit housing. These change the village from being a place with individuality into a few period buildings bullied from all sides by housing and rendering the original village meaningless. Take a walk over to 40 acres to see one such monstrosity being built right now. Is this part of the solution to the housing crisis? The truth is that we would need to build a development like Ivy Farm every 2.5 hours to keep pace with immigration alone. It's a fallacious argument to claim that this is part of any solution. Several councillors speaking about the Clear Lane development closed by saying they did not want to vote for, yet felt cowed into doing so for fear of costs. I hear the line, I must protect the council from costs. But what are you really protecting? A budget? Or it's certainly not the actual place. Ask yourself, in years to come, will people gather and say, you remember 2025? What a great year that was when we protected the budget, while simultaneously looking out at houses packed side by side, choked by the concrete tyres and the speed humps that form today's developments. Then, while scratching one's head, one might ask, by the way, where does East Malling start and finish? Can't tell anymore.
So this is going to be Becky Prince, statement read out by Jason Allen, please.
I wish to object to this proposed planning application, both as a resident of East Malling and a GP in the Malling PCN for the past 15 years. Satisfaction with GP appointment access is at an all-time low, despite the tireless efforts of my colleagues and I. Our area is already facing significant population growth, particularly due to developments in Kings Hill and East Malling, but there has been no increase in funding for additional full-time GPs to meet this demand. While national reforms are positive, they still rely heavily on recruiting non-doctor professionals and newly qualified GPs who require supervision from experienced doctors. The assumption that surgeries can simply absorb more patients from new developments without significant consultation or impact on patient satisfaction is unrealistic. Even when new surgery buildings are planned, there is rarely a discussion about where the experienced GPs to staff them will come from. Malling has long had a strong primary care network, but under the current NHS climate, there is an inevitable struggle to meet the growing demand. Recent data shows our area is significantly worse than the national average for issues like emergency admissions for self-harm and falls in older adults. Proactive, intensive support from the healthcare system is critical, but as the population grows, it's becoming harder to provide that care. During my 5-year tenure as GP clinical lead for diabetes in Kent and Medway, I saw firsthand the challenges in meeting healthcare targets with the resources we have. We're already falling short on key diabetes targets, and absorbing new patients from further developments will only worsen this situation. The problem is not with the dedication of the healthcare professionals, but the limited resources and appointment availability. Given these challenges, I urge the Planning Department to pause and assess how this development will impact local healthcare services. The physical and mental health of the community must be prioritised, and that won't be possible if our healthcare system continues to be stretched. Your local GPs will continue to go above and beyond to ensure safe care, but it is crucial that the Planning Department consider the strain on local healthcare when making decisions about future developments in East Malling and the surrounding areas. Dr. Rebecca Prince, General Practitioner and GP with an enhanced role in mental health. Thank you.
Okay, so the last speaker tonight will be Andy Wilford, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. My name is Andy Wilford, Head of Land and Planning at Esquire Developments. We are a multi-award winning SME house builder based in Longfield, Kent. We are a high-quality developer building bespoke, all-electric schemes throughout Kent and Sussex. This application for a modest 52 dwellings on the edge of a sustainable village has been thoroughly assessed by the Council's planning officers and the professional experts comprising the statutory consultees. All statutory consultees, including specifically KCC Highways, KCC Ecology, Natural England and the Council's Conservation Officer, have no objection to the application. For all intents and purposes, this scheme has not only satisfied all the necessary technical planning requirements, but is being brought forward by an SME house builder, which has a strong track record, and in the context of where the government is seeking to improve the number of SMEs in the market to improve design quality and choice for homeowners. However, we unfortunately find ourselves in a position where the application now faces the potential for up to 6 reasons for refusal, which in our view are unsubstantiated and a subsequent appeal wholly unnecessary. Members will be aware of the great challenge both the country and this council has in meeting housing requirements, both under the current and previous government housing targets. Whether or not you agree with them, there is an undeniable fact that many parts of the borough are required to accommodate new houses, both now and in the future, to meet these needs. This includes arguably much more sensitive locations, including Greenbelt and AONB. Indeed, Greenbelt is already being lost in the borough, responding to the government's new approach to rebuild and redefine the planning system. These housing targets may be unpopular with local communities and places difficult decisions in your hands, but it is a necessity if this council and indeed this country is to go any way to ensuring that future generations have the opportunity to live in the village or borough in which they wish. Sites of this nature, whilst unpopular with a few, are exactly the type of development that first-time buyers and growing families need to come forward to rectify the housing shortfall and allow people to progress on the housing ladder. In the wider context, these 52 dwellings amount to less than 5% of the council's annual target. In practice, the council needs another 20 schemes of this size per year for at least 15 years to come forward if it is to meet these housing challenges. Members, we completely understand that this is a significant challenge. We understand that local communities are passionate and want to protect the area in which they live. We understand that this is a difficult decision, but every part of the borough will be required to accommodate growth. And based on planning policies, the wider planning balance on this site, which has no statutory objections, and in the context of the wider challenges this council faces to deliver the homes needed for those in greatest need now and in the future, it is the right decision to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go to the local members first of all. So, Councillor Tatton, please.
Much, your worship, and thank you once again to everyone for coming to speak this evening, some of you for the fourth time. There is quite a lot that we need to go through, but what I'd like to do is approach it in two chunks. We're here because of the legal report and the issue of whether the grounds of refusal are defensible and reasonable. So in considering that issue, I'd like to look first of all at a number of appeal decisions and cost decisions, and then come back to some of the detail of the application. First of all, a cost decision from 2021. It's a few years ago, but the thrust of the inspector's comments is still valid, I think. It's an East Sussex case, land south of South Street, East Hoathley, where costs were refused. And the inspector said, the weight given to benefits of the proposed development in the overall planning balance when engaging the tilted balance is a matter of planning judgment, and it is for the decision maker to determine whether the adverse impacts of granting permission would not significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the proposed development. And he goes on to say, I recognise that my findings in respect of the tilted balance and my overall decision to grant planning permission was different to the council's assessment. However, the council members in this case were entitled not to accept the professional advice of officers so long as a case could be made for the contrary view. And that is what I think the Area 2 committee did. We recognised that we don't have a 5-year land supply. We recognised the need for housing, and we talked about the Section 106 contributions. We were, I think, diligent in our deliberations over the course of 3 very long meetings, and we reached a different view to the officers on balance based on all the facts before us, and concluded that there are material legitimate planning grounds for refusal, which cumulatively, significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. And I don't think it can reasonably be said that those are based on vague, generalised or inaccurate assertions. Going back through all the appeal decisions that I meticulously store on my tablet, I came across 2 Yardley Park in Tunbridge from 2023, which the council refused on grounds of the impact to Tunbridge Conservation Area, local character and neighbouring amenity, and I think that was an officer decision. On appeal, the inspector found that the sole adverse impact was to biodiversity and protected species, which hadn't been one of the grounds of refusal. So you can never be sure what an inspector is going to pick up on or what weight will be attached to any harm. In fact, in one of the 13 appeal decisions the applicants have been involved in over the last 3 years, which was sent to us the other day by a resident, and this is the Upner Road case, 2021, The main issues appear to have been harm to countryside and landscape character, but the inspector took it upon himself to find that sustainability, accessibility and highway safety were of sufficient concern that he should give them weight in the balance, even though they had not been a ground of refusal raised by the council and highways had not objected. More recently, in this borough, we've had Court Lane nurseries at Hadlow, which was allowed. 57 dwellings, 50% affordable housing, a children's day nursery, so arguably greater benefits than Ivy Farm. That site is largely contained on 3 sides by development. It's considered previously developed land and judged to be grey belt. There are historic elements nearby, but the 30-odd houses at the Forstall separate them from the development site, and so the inspector found no harm to heritage, but moderate harm to character. Regarding sustainability, the inspector agreed that the existing footway on Court Lane is narrow in places, but the development would provide an alternative pedestrian link to the Forstall, which he found will enable a safe and convenient route towards the shops. I'd suggest that we can distinguish that decision from Ivy Farm, where we have an orchard sitting slap bang between the 4 historic farmsteads which form part of the distinctive character and rural gateway to the conservation area for the historic medieval core of East Malling Village. Ivy Farm very clearly contributes to local character and nearby heritage assets, and everyone seems to accept that there is some level of heritage harm. At Ivy Farm, there is no other path proposed, and residents won't be able to avoid the narrow pavements that we've heard residents speak about. There isn't any other option. And incidentally, there are no dropped curbs between the development and the village crossroads, which further hinders accessibility. So far as I can see, no costs arose from the Hadlow appeal. We've also had the Moto appeal for the truck stop at Ruton, an application that was refused by a majority of the Area 2 members. Again, as far as I'm aware, the inspector allowed the appeal but hasn't awarded costs. This council sought costs of a dismissed appeal for development of the property at Waterbury Crossroads because the required amount of evidence hadn't been submitted by the appellant, but the inspector found that the case wasn't wholly without merit, and so costs would not apply. I don't think it can be said reasonably that the grounds of refusal proposed for Ivy Farm are wholly without merit, and therefore this must diminish the risk of costs, whether significant or otherwise. I also wanted to touch on a recent Ashford Planning Committee case that happened to involve the same applicant. And I picked that up on social media and I was intrigued. So I got online and I looked up the committee papers and the YouTube stream. And it was a very similar case. It was development on the fringe of Bethersden behind a listed public house, near other heritage assets and between historic farms. Ashford's Planning Committee refused that on harm to heritage assets, landscape character, impact on a single neighbour, issues regarding sustainability and highway safety, although highways were not objecting. Like Tunbridge and Malling, Ashford doesn't have a 5-year land supply. There was no indication from those officers that those grounds were not defensible or would expose the council to any risk of costs, although they did advise against refusing on prematurity. It was interesting to compare Ashford's approach with our own, with senior officers even volunteering further grounds of refusal, and that was all against the backdrop of the case officer recommending approval. But the officers must have thought that members had come to their decision reasonably, and I think that's the case here. Area 2 have debated, we've exercised our planning judgment and concluded that the harms outweigh the benefits. Coming to Ivy Farm specifically, and firstly heritage, the revised MPPF continues to give great weight to harm to heritage assets, whether that harm is substantial or less than substantial. And under legislation, we must have special regard to the desirability of preserving listed buildings and their settings. The pre-app advice made no mention of heritage assets, and I do think it should have been flagged at a much earlier stage. And the conservation area appraisal and the non-designated heritage assets should have been considered well before they were. And in fairness to the applicant, they had asked for the conservation area appraisal, but they hadn't received it. The applicant accepts less than substantial harm to the conservation area, negligible harm to Belvedere Oast, but says no harm to Ivy House Farm or Huntley Cottage, even though they accept that the rural surroundings contribute to the significance of those two listed buildings. I think it's within paragraph 6.2 of the committee report. It says the conservation officer does not consider harm is of a level to warrant refusal, but the conservation officer concludes his remarks by saying less than substantial harm has been identified and there needs to be a judgment balancing the harm against the public benefits, and says this is not a heritage matter but a planning matter, so the exercise of that planning judgment lies with us this evening. The parish council's heritage consultant says less than substantial harm to Ivy Farm and Huntley Cottage, which still carries great weight in MPPF terms, and we are entitled as decision maker to accept that opposite view. Huntley Cottage, as we heard, is an attractive listed farmhouse fronting the application site, and historically it was connected with it according to the tithe map, as was Ivy House Farm, a particularly fine example of a more wealthy farmstead. And all three of those were at one time in the ownership of Sir John Twisden of Bradbourne House, a significant local landowner. The orchards at Ivy Farm form part of the setting and backdrop of those listed buildings. Wendy Rogers of KCC Heritage expresses her concern over the number of dwellings being contrary to the historic landscape character of dispersed farms within open linear fields. Of Belvedere Farm, which is a non-designated heritage asset, she says that although it will retain connection to the east and the south with the retention of the orchard, it will be harmed by the intensive development to the north. We've seen with the Eden Farm appeal near West Malling Station that non-designated heritage assets can tip the balance in favour of refusal. There's a fourth farm, Rocks Farm, to the northeast on Rocks Road. Its former oasts are prominent on MR 107, which runs through the open countryside to the east of Ivy Farm. Ivy Farm essentially forms part of the undeveloped rural landscape between these four historic farms, providing an important visual and spatial break between them. The conservation area appraisal says that the surrounding landscape is distinctive, giving the conservation area a unique character. On all sides, the historic core of the village has been squeezed by development, except to the south, where the appeal site and the orchard land to the west maintain a visually positive rural quality that clearly contributes to the conservation area and to the various heritage assets that have been mentioned. The conservation officer says that the overall sense to the south remains that of a rural landscape, and the proposal will impact that perception. When you pass the Oasts at Rocks Farm on MR 107 heading south, you have a distinct impression of leaving the village behind you, with countryside ahead on all sides. Similarly, on Wateringbury Road, over the speed table, and you're in orchard and farm territory. The contrast between the very compact built form of East Malling Village through High Street and Chapel Street and the rural orchard-lined approach to the south is incredibly stark. The conservation area appraisal recognises that buildings immediately outside the boundary can have a significant impact in many different ways. It also says some of the open spaces remain between the farmsteads, allowing their distinct identities to be retained. The retention of these important spaces, not just as visual breaks, but as a record of the historic development of the village, is essential, as they are as important to the character of the conservation area as the buildings themselves. Although that may be intended to relate to farms within the conservation area, arguably that same principle strongly applies to the historic farms outside, where the space between them remains intact. That rural landscape, the location of farms in relation to each other, and the spaces between them aids the understanding of how East Malling has evolved over time and how agriculture has been an important way of life. And in my view, you cannot better reveal the significance of these heritage assets or enhance them by planting a housing estate on the orchard that sits between them. Its erosion, which Wendy Rogers talks about, would to my mind cause harm and have a significant detrimental impact on the distinctive character of this part of the village, the conservation area and the heritage assets. Additionally, the pattern of development would appear to be at odds with the strong linear pattern of High Street and Chapel Street. It would be suburbanising encroachment into the countryside and would be seen as such from Wateringbury Road, the conservation area at Chapel Street, and by users of MR107, including from the conservation area by Rocks Farm Oasts. The volume of built form would be unmistakably visible through the access and over and through vegetation. The LVIA accepts that even at year 15, the visual harm would be moderate adverse due to visible massing and a more developed skyline. Impact from lighting in an area that is currently dark would be moderate. Landscaping wouldn't screen the development at all times of year, and of course there would be associated movements from vehicles and noise as well. Members heard about the recent appeal at Minster-on-Sea in Thanet, which was refused, partly due to the inspector's concern around landscape character and the impact from the creation of the access, which it was felt would harm the rural approach to Minster. Potential impacts from the access were highlighted at pre-app stage, and I do think the removal of boundary trees to create the access would harm both the character of Wateringbury Road and the nearby conservation area. The report says it would be difficult to maintain a ground of refusal on sustainability, but that implies it's not impossible. The evidence submitted for the major development at East Malling Research notes the constraints through High Street and Chapel Street as a result of the historic street pattern and on-street parking. And it says that High Street is operating at around capacity now. Even KCC disagree with the Ivy Farm evidence that there is a decent range of sustainable transport options and say that due to the modest local services, residents are likely to have to look further afield for day-to-day needs, which is pretty much what the inspector said in the Upnor case I quoted earlier. KCC also accept the pavements are narrow and will to some extent discourage pedestrian trips. As for cycling, I suspect Councillor Crisp may wish to offer his view. On ecology, this and the adjacent priority habitat woodland are quite the oasis for biodiversity. It just doesn't sound like an ecologically deficient site to me. And things got off to not a good start regarding protected species. The application form suggested any protected species were off-site, and the first ecological report didn't mention badgers. And yet we've heard and seen photographs showing that there was interference that took place in the months beforehand. Save for the intervention and the alertness of local residents, this may never have been brought to light. I don't know who was responsible and I make no allegations about it, but it's inconceivable, I think, that the applicant didn't know that there were badgers within the site. Looking at the surveys again, it seems from the plan, which I think is attached to technical note 2, that cameras were not placed along the southern edge of the wood, and therefore we cannot know for sure to what extent badgers are entering from that direction into the orchard. It also doesn't help that the surveys were not carried out at the optimum time of year when badgers are most active. What we do know is that in July last year, 2 new entrances had appeared or reappeared in the orchard, and now there are 8. So that suggests a busy set of badgers, and it looks certain these link to the set in the adjacent wood and are not outliers, as was previously suggested. And just to quote KCC Ecology, the holes are going towards the direction of the woods, suggesting that the set within the adjacent wood and the holes in the development site are connected. KCC also say, when referring to the 20-metre buffer zone, we highlight that the centre of the buffer area is the edge of the woodland and not the holes within the development site, as if this is something that we might overlook but shouldn't do. I can't see that they actually say outright whether they agree with a 20-metre buffer or not. And I still query whether it's down to us as the decision maker to make a judgment on what an appropriate buffer would be, taking into account the particular characteristics of the site, the difference in levels, which will dictate how the road can be laid out, the fact that badgers straddle the wood over which the applicant has no control because it's in separate ownership, and what we know about where the badgers are and how they're behaving. Mr. Bailey said at a previous meeting that it may be good practice to have a 30-metre buffer, but there is nothing from Natural England that requires 30 metres. If there is no guidance, is there anything then that means we must accept a 20-metre buffer just because that's what the applicant chooses to offer, even if we think that is inadequate and the particular circumstances require something greater? Because a buffer fixed on the woodland edge barely gives a 10-metre buffer to the entrances in the woodland, in the orchard. The applicants say in their latest technical note too that they don't intend to seek a closure of the set, while KCC say a closure will be needed, and I think KCC will be right. And so it seems to me that by approving development on the basis of a parameter plan that provides only a 10-metre buffer to the entrances in the orchard, we would by design be causing an unacceptable impact on protected species, as we are essentially inviting a set closure. The MPPF hierarchy of actions looks firstly to avoidance, then mitigation, and then compensation. Natural England have confirmed issuing a licence is a last resort, and that being granted a licence, that before being granted a licence, the applicant must show they've tried everything else possible. Natural England also place responsibility on us as the LPA to satisfy ourselves that licensable impacts can be avoided, for example, through design decisions or locating development further away. With the site being a blank canvas, free of any built form, how can we say granting permission in line with the parameter plan would demonstrate that the test has been met and that we are fulfilling our obligations? I'd say it's somewhat misleading to say that Natural England do not object. My understanding is that it doesn't meet the threshold for intervention, as this isn't a statutorily protected nature conservation site or landscape, so they haven't specifically considered the plans or what the impact on the badgers might be. Instead, they've directed us to their standing advice, and this explains that the full impact of the development proposal on protected species must be considered before granting planning permission, and only in exceptional circumstances should conditions be included for additional surveys. And I would question whether this being an outline planning application can be deemed an exceptional circumstance. The final ground relates to the neighbour. As the neighbour has pointed out several times, there are windows in their south elevation. That they include full height bedroom windows. And I can understand the residents' fears around privacy and how the reasonable enjoyment of their property will be impacted. They're probably used to having the farmer on the other side of the fence from time to time and seasonal fruit pickers, but that's quite limited in comparison to having 180 plus traffic movements per day and untold pairs of eyes peering through any screening. I remain concerned that any planting will need to be very high because of the land levels and dense and will take a long time to establish. It will be subject to seasonal change and it won't shield visual intrusion on the glare of headlights at all times of the year. The LVIA accepts an ongoing adverse impact. It feels an unacceptable change from a neighbour amenity point of view. And in the Ashford case, the planning committee cited neighbouring amenity as a ground of refusal because of headlights that would enter the property from the road that would be directly opposite. And I don't think a refusal on this ground is unreasonable. So, Your Worship, those are my concerns. I have to say I haven't seen or read anything between this meeting and the last one that leaves me inclined to change my view about the application. But of course, I will be listening to what other people have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tatton. Councillor Rao, did you want to go next as a local member?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I spent a great deal of time looking at this in the last few days and come up with a huge amount of information, most of which we've already heard from either Councillor Tatton or from members of the public who I think have made a very good job of coming up with the reasons for refusal. I'm sure you're all aware that this has been debated at Area 2 at least 3 times before, and on both occasions I supported refusal. Now, this may mean that I'm predetermining it, but I'm predisposed to say that it is possible, given the right evidence, that I may change my opinion. You will have heard from Councillor Tatton about heritage, wildlife and conservation, but I'm going to speak briefly about road safety, sustainability and overlooking. Let me start with road safety. Paragraph 116 of the NPPF states that the development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there will be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be severe. I believe that this development, together with other recently approved developments in East Malling, would have an unacceptable cumulative impact and so become severe upon the road network. Because, as I will explain later, the residents of this proposal will be car dependent. In fact, this cumulative impact was brought to our attention in the transport statement from the highways experts, the developers of the land west of Stickins Lane. And I know KCC make no mention of this, but I suspect they have only done a visual study, not done a visual study, but only a desk study. Let's consider the impact for a moment. Government stats say that the site of this size will generate 100,000 movements per year, which we've heard from members of the public. That equates to 174 per day and not the 50 that the developer suggests. Just bear in mind, there are already 3,000 plus per day on the Water-in-Bury Road. We should note at this point that the Water-in-Bury Road has been in existence since before 1700. I have a map dated 1706 that it appears on, and some photographs showing the mid-1800s still showing it. Not changed at all in that time, and it hasn't changed again since. And it was definitely not constructed to carry 3,300 plus vehicle movements per day. Let's also consider the accident statistics. Transport statement only notes 6 minor accidents between 2016 and 21. Well, that's well out of date and doesn't take into account 14 evident serious accidents, 1 fatality over the last 3 years, nor the many unreported minor RTCs that occur daily. I have not mentioned here the effect of extra traffic will have on the AQMA at Water-in-Bury Crossroads, but I'm sure Councillors Sarah Hudson and Matt Ball may have something to say about that. We are aware, as we've been told, we are aware of a very similar application at Minster, and Councillor Tatton has gone through that as one or two of our local residents. I know one of the policies to which the paragraph 11D of the framework tells me to have particular regard is paragraph 115, wherein I'm told, this is what the inspector has said at that, which I don't think has been mentioned so far. I note that one of the policies which paragraph 11D part 2 of the framework tells me to have particular regard is paragraph 115, wherein I am told to be ensured that safe and suitable access to the site can be achieved by all users. I have found earlier in this decision that the development would not do this contrary to the development plan. This leads me nicely into sustainability. Pedestrians, especially those who are pushing prams or have difficulty walking, going north the site down Chapel Street to East Malling Railway Station and beyond will find difficulty in 1, crossing Gillett's Lane, there is no drop curb. 2, 3 bollards encroaching the footway just before the junction with Rocks Road require pedestrians to deviate round them with a footway width of just 660 millimetres. Adjacent to the middle bollard, the Kent Design Guides recommends a minimum width for local distributor road or major and minor access roads varies from 1.2 to 1.8 metres to be clear of obstructions. Traffic at Chapel Street most clearly does not comply in either case, and I have distributed some photographs to evidence this evening. Crossing the Rocks Road, there is no drop curb on the north side from the junction past the entrance to the railway. And 4, for those going further, there is a private driveway without a drop curb on either side. Over much of that way, anyone meeting a pedestrian with a pram will have to move into the road to pass. The pedestrian on High Street and Chapel Street is not safe and suitable access for all users to the application site. Contrary to MPPF paragraph 115, in essence, the footway along Chapel Street is too narrow and is often restricted by vehicles parked on the curbs. And it's also been mentioned tonight that a child was hit a couple of weeks back by a driver of a van who didn't stop. How many more children, parents, grandmothers, etc., will be clipped by vans and trucks coming down this road? There are many, many vehicles that do not follow the instructions of the highway code when it says 6'6" restriction. Most vans are over 6'6", including their wing mirrors. Now, carrying on with sustainability, we note that developer claims there are numerous cycle paths in the area. Now, I've lived there for 47 years and as yet have not found any cycle paths in East Malling. And already been mentioned, Councillor Crisp has tried cycling down the Wateringbury Road, and I believe he said, "I've done it once, but found it too dangerous to try it again." It's been mentioned about buses. There is only one bus, one a week. It leaves at 10:30 on a Friday and arrives back at 13:30 on a Friday. But there is a bus service further away, but it entails a 1 kilometre walk to the bus stop along Chapel Street. It's true, however, that the railway does provide an hourly service to Maidstone and London, but the station is unmanned, has only one ticket machine, which more often than not is unserviceable. More importantly, if you are infirmed or have small children in a pram, you need to negotiate the 39 steps to get to the platform. Let's look at other sustainable services. Shops. There is a shop within a fairly short walk to this proposal. It's a hairdresser. Not something you're going to use every day. The nearest grocery shop is a small convenience store over 800 metres away. There is a public house within walking distance, but again, not something most people will use every day. All these facilities require a pedestrian to brave the narrow footpath, as discussed earlier, or indeed use a car. Schools. The already oversubscribed secondary school is very close to the convenience store, but is again over 800 metres away. And the primary school is about 1.75 kilometres. Now, we all know here to avoid the school run every day because parents do not want walk their children to school. So again, the development will promote the use of vehicles for the school run. Very few parents take their kids to the local schools anyway. They're nearly all driven to somewhere far apart. My own grandson is taken 9 miles to Paddock Wood every day and collected every day because there is insufficient bus service to get there. Now, I want to look slightly or quickly at the overlooking of the property adjacent to the proposed development. We've heard a lot about this tonight, and we've been told at previous committee meetings that the property at 51 Wateringbury Road does not suffer overlooking from the access road. However, the developers in their last submission aim to move the access further south by a whole 4 metres. For those who are familiar with 4 metres, that's 12 foot, about twice my height. We understand they did this to reduce the non-existent overlooking to the south-facing full-height windows, which we are told don't exist. Why move it if the overlooking does not exist? Seems a bit strange to me. The windows do exist, and anybody using the road will be able to see directly into the property, number 51. So they do exist, and we have been if we'd have been allowed a side inspection, we would have been able to see that, and incidentally, be able to assess the sustainability issue previously discussed. We are told the access is positioned at the north end of the site because it's the only place where there is a gap in the hedgerow along the Water and Bury Road. Not true. There are more gaps in the hedgerow further south, in fact at least 3, some far larger than proposed. Again, a site inspection may have made this abundantly clear. But any of these would entail exiting onto a higher speed limit, thus bigger visibility displays, thus making the development less attractive to buyers. Ivy Farm complies with 2 policies of paragraph 11D of the NPPF. 66, this does apply. 66, affordable housing, and 139, good design, but it does not comply with 4 other policies. 101, sustainable location. 115, sustainable transport. 129, the scope to promote sustainable travel modes that limit the future car use. And 135, sympathetic to local character and history. In addition to paragraph 10 of the NPPF states that at the heart of the framework is a presumption in favour of sustainable development. This application is clearly not sustainable and is therefore contrary to the prime intention of the NPPF. We have been advised that many of our arguments do not hold water as they are out of date. However, the Broke Hill Golf Club Award said that out-of-date development policies may carry additional weight. As was pointed out, this predates the 224 NPPF. However, paragraph 232 of the 224 NPPF states that existing policies should not be considered out of date simply because they were adopted or made prior to the publication of this framework. Due weight should be given to them according to their degree of consistency with this framework. We are also advised recently in a presentation to this committee, unless policies are superseded, they do not become out of date. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to reserve my option to speak again later if possible.
Thank you very much. Cabinet Member for Planning, please. Your next, Mike.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to start by defending my planning officers who've come under intense criticism from members of the public over the last few months. Let us be very clear. The power in planning is vested in the elected members at this committee, council, planning committees. Planning officers cannot and did not override us. They are advisors only. They will often put their case robustly, very robustly, and they are the experts. And we are often wise enough to heed their advice, but we are not bound to. But there is a definite risk of appeal if we go against their expert opinion. However, those who attended Area 2 recall that the 2 officers who've had so much criticism spent half an hour helping local members draft coherent reasons for a refusal in planning terms, and they deserve our thanks for that. Of those 6 reasons for refusal, none were strong enough to refuse on their own. But I agree with Councillor Tatton, there is a cumulative harm, and I think we would be justified in refusing on those 6 grounds, and it would be deemed a reasonable refusal even if we lost an appeal. However, things have changed in the last few hours. 2 hours before this meeting, we all received a supplementary report that will require the developer to submit a badger report by a competent ecologist as a reserved matter application after we have made our decision. The decision tonight is only about access to the site and the concept of 52 houses. It is only about the access. That access could well impact the badger sets. It's right in that area of the site. I do not believe we should approve access until we've had sight of that report. The application without a badger report is not complete and should not have been validated. And that should be added to the list of reasons for refusal tonight. Many developers have a cavalier disregard for reserved matters applications. Ducks Farm asbestos removal is a case in question, where the developer did not even submit his asbestos removal application until after he'd been caught removing the asbestos. The badger report is integral to the decision for the whole of this site. We must have sight of it before any decision. So I'm minded, unless somebody comes up with some really good ideas, I'm minded to vote for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I could just come back on that ground that the Cabinet member has raised in particular. Yes, it is an outline application with the point of access for consideration at this point in time. So layout is reserved to future consideration. So the actual location of the internal access road is not known at this time. And I think if I could refer to the case officer, Robin, if you can bring up that on the screen, that indicative map that the applicant provided at our request, showing a potential alternative layout of the access road. Again, as I said, that is a reserved matter that would come forward through the reserved matters application. So members tonight aren't actually considering that internal access road and where that's going to go. And that is why that additional condition is requested to be added should members be minded to approve, on the basis that that gives further control the local authority at reserved matters to require an updated survey. Because you've heard tonight that obviously badgers are quite active on the site. Quite rightly, the applicant potentially could have 3 years to implement this permission. So the reality is those could further increase or decrease over a period of time. So the ability of having that additional badger survey to be submitted at the time of reserved matters allows an updated evidence base to be considered at that time and what impact that would have on the access road. So just so members have that understanding, as I said, we're not considering the internal layout of the access road. That is shown up there purely as an indicative. You can see the outline of the one that was previously shown as the indicative in brown. Robin, if you could just highlight that one. And the alternative to the left of that shows an alternative indicative layout. So it just shows you that the access road could potentially change. Likewise, so could the subsequent impact on the badger set. Likewise, recommendation for the additional condition is to address that point so we have up-to-date, detailed information when we consider the reserved matters at that stage. So we consider the likely impact on the activity of badgers there and then. I just thought it's important, thank you, Your Worship, to allow me to address that point now.
Thank you for letting me come back, Your Worship. Yes, you're correct. The internal road is a matter for later applications, but that internal road must connect at some point to the access we are deciding tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tanner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a few things I'd like to say regarding this application. Firstly, the numerous communications from local residents to members, officers and the Chief Executive have been suggesting that the council has behaved inappropriately in dealing with this application and that officers have hidden information and basically got it wrong. I personally find this rather distasteful, especially as Robin is a really senior officer. And this is the 4th hearing of this case. That is over and above the requirement, I'm sure, of any council. And I feel our officers in particular, who are trained and qualified in this field, deserve more respect. Also, the countless emails over the last few months sent to councillors and more recently written communications posted through our letterboxes at home is close to harassment. Making decisions on planning applications to be as fair as possible to residents while protecting the position of TNBC is difficult enough without intimidation from those living close by to the proposed development. And finally, I'd like to compare this application to one which is very similar to one that came forward recently for my ward in Kings Hill. My ward colleagues and I raised concerns mirroring those that we have heard previously and again tonight. That's the cutting down of trees, the loss of wildlife and their habitats, and increased traffic issues, of which Kings Hill suffers regularly when our roads become gridlocked as a result of even minor incidents. And that's made worse because the surrounding villages, including East Malling, refuse to allow us to have another access road into their villages. For our application, this leaves emergency vehicles with no contingency arrangements when our roads are at a standstill. Having expressed all of this, and with just as many of our residents being in the chamber speaking against that particular application, we were told in no uncertain terms by a councillor from East Malling that our concerns were no different to those from across the country, and we just need to learn to live with the extra traffic. It would seem to me that their response shouldn't apply to their own ward, apparently. I haven't heard anything new tonight, and as East Malling councillors all voted for the very similar development for Kings Hill to go ahead. And so for the sake of consistency, I shall follow their lead and I will be voting in line with officer recommendations tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hood next, and then the Leader of the Council.
Wow. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not sure that planning committees are any forum for parochialism. I fully understand the relationship between the orchard and the nearby heritage assets and with their obvious agricultural connections. I fail to understand how we can mitigate for the loss of an orchard in terms of biodiversity. The pedestrian access is almost unimprovable because of the compromised width of the roads and the pavements, and it's certainly not a sustainable location as we've heard about the buses. I mean, the evidence that we've been supplied with previously and what is actually the case are two completely different things. We've heard Councillor Crisp's name mentioned a couple of times already. Nobody would believe you can cycle along there safely. And we are simply going to be forcing people to rely on their car as their sole means of transportation. And of course, we've got all the congestion and the AQMA down at Wateringbury as well. Kent County Council makes explicitly clear that they expect travel by active travel to have priority, but that is just unachievable through this scheme. I think Councillor Tatton has given a clear case of another application in Bethersden which has been rejected on very similar grounds to this, and I've followed this application through online through all of the different meetings, and I've been massively impressed by the research that's been done by local members in this case, and I absolutely have support them in rejecting this.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you very much. Obviously, this being a consideration as a planning committee, I speak very much as a local member, including one of the two with Sarah, who represents Wateringbury. I'm going to start with a few points about sort of procedural issues. I will then move on to a few points about what we've heard tonight, and I've been making notes as we go along. Firstly, Mike Taylor and Kim Tanner are right. Some of the stuff we've heard said about planning officers in particular is frankly ridiculous. And I think James and Robin in particular, and all of the officers who've contributed to this, have done a tremendous job under a huge amount of pressure. So I'd like to thank them for that. And they certainly retain my confidence in terms of advising. As Mike said, they advise the committee. We decide ultimately, and they have provided good advice to us, and I thank them very much for that. Your regular reminder that I always say at every single area too, that planning is essentially a legal process. We cannot, I mean, people can laugh about that in the chamber, but that it wasn't me who decided that. That is the law of the land, which is determined up in Westminster, and I'd suggest you speak to your local MP about that. So, given it's essentially a legal process, what we have to do is assess the proposals in line with the planning policies that we have. We do so in a quasi-judicial capacity, and we can't just simply reject it because we think one way or the other, or because we like something we've heard or not. I've driven this road many times. I know it well. I've sat in there in rush hour, and I can't see how the access works, because I have no planning evidence to substantiate a reason for refusal in front of me this evening in order to do that. And that's really difficult for all of us, because unfortunately, we are not using our judgment or common sense to come to decisions. We are using planning law. I want to also pick up on something that Kim said. On Friday evening, a number of members contacted me asking if I had received something through my letterbox at my home address in relation to this planning application. No, I hadn't. And I think in a day and age in which elected representatives on all levels are being murdered, sometimes for simply doing their job, and are under attack for expressing an opinion one way or the other, there is a greater height. And this council recently passed a debate not hate motion unanimously, and rightly so, that's been promoted by the local government association. We are all here because we care about the place. We are all local residents ourselves. And I think sometimes things just cross a line, and I think that crossed a line. And I know that speaking to a number of colleagues around the chamber that they felt that that did. And I don't think we should have to put up with any sort of intimidation or abuse. Now, I didn't receive one of these because under police advice, I had to have my home address taken off the website because I had been on the end of threats via social media in that case. So I've kind of got the first-hand experience. I wouldn't want my worst enemy to go through that, let alone anyone who cares about their community. So if that was sought to influence us, it's probably done the precise opposite. The next point I want to reference is this discussion that has emerged during the evening about costs and whether we have a costs award appeal or not. Our job is to assess the planning application in front of us and not to necessarily make a decision because we may or may not get a costs award. I'm going to make my judgment tonight based on whether I think we're going to be, whether it's ultimately the right thing to do in planning law, but also I want to make sure that if we do refuse tonight, we refuse on grounds that can be defended at appeal. That is not to refuse on the most grounds we can possibly find. That is to refuse on the best quality grounds that we can find. Frankly, we need one good reason to win an appeal if this does go to appeal, not multiple that could actually seek to undermine one good appeal. I hope members have read the legal report. I am going to pick up on the Wateringbury issues, though. We've heard a lot about that during the course of the evening. As one of the representatives of Wateringbury, I care about maintaining and maintaining the village as somewhere that people can access, i.e. get to, and also from an air quality perspective to make sure it's as healthy as possible for residents living in the village. Now, that leads me on to questions about air quality that perhaps Robin can pick up. Given that this is a scheme for 52 units, it will clearly generate traffic that's been discussed. Now, I noticed that air quality is mentioned in the first report that went to Area 2 on the 18th of September. And I was looking at this when it came. It's at 6.49 of that particular report. And it says, concerns regarding air quality have been raised. Although monitoring has been undertaken, there has not been a need to impose an air quality management area in East Malling Village. The quantum of development proposed is not likely to lead to there being to do so. Well, that's fine in relation to East Malling, but it's silent about Wateringbury. I've looked at the comments from Environmental Health on this planning application that came in on the 22nd of July 2022, and the environmental health officer said, I would like to see an air quality report for this development and its impact on the water in Etbury AQMA, as traffic will either have to pass south through this or north through East Malling High Street. Now, I can't find on the portal, but I am happy to be corrected, that report. I've been looking for it during the course of the speeches, but I'd just be grateful for some reassurance that that has been looked at. If not, then we might want to consider whether there's grounds for refusal to explore from there. I want to pick up on a couple of other issues, and then I'll come on to some suggestions. We heard at the very end from one of the or via a representative from one of the GPs, and who was objecting to the scheme. And unfortunately, I hear what they say, absolutely, but I feel their comments are in the wrong place. As Overview and Scrutiny Committee discussed at length last week, we need to get the body, the statutory consultee, the body that is responsible for the organisation of the NHS, to start making these comments if indeed these are the case. Because unfortunately, while that body does not object to planning applications, it becomes incredibly difficult for us to substantiate a reason for refusal. And this lies at the absolute heart of this. So Kent and Medway ICB have got a lot of questions to answer, and I wrote to them yesterday on behalf of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, but that sort of has been exemplified by those comments from the local GP. And the reason that they've got questions to answer is because of things like, you build 52 houses, therefore you're going to generate more, a greater need for doctor surgeries. Well, I'd like to test that argument against the fact that actually, are the 52 houses directly or indirectly actually serving people who are already living in the vicinity of the village or not? Actually, even though these might not, obviously, not all of them will be affordable housing, the whole concept of the housing ladder applies, i.e. people move out of accommodation, which frees up accommodation that they've moved into for people who are on the housing list or looking for something different to buy or rent or move into if they're part of the housing association. And I know our population has increased, but actually Tunbridge Wells is quite interested in this concept because they had significant development over the last 10 to 15 years, but their population's actually decreased in that time. One of the questions to me around this, before taking at face value what the doctors are saying, is actually to explore with the ICB what the relationship is between development and population increase. Because we know, if we speak to our housing team, I'm sure Eleanor can make this point very well, that actually we've got a housing need and we've got overcrowding in a number of properties in our own borough at the moment. So building more properties will actually simply allow a greater standard of accommodation for people who are already living here but are sofa surfing. The final 2 points I want to make are one about badgers, and the point that Mike made I think is really good and to the absolute nub of the issue, but this all comes down to a question of risk. If we want to retain some sort of control over this, then we need to probably, if we can't find a reason to refuse, accept the application this evening, because we will have the safeguard that is brought in by that condition. But at the same time, I think this application has been going on for years. It was first came to committee in September. So why has this come 2 hours before the meeting? Is it because we're not really sure about the information that has been put forward? I think you can argue that both ways, but it really, if we want to maintain control, we do not have the guarantee that the inspector will impose that condition. The final point is we heard a bit about a local plan. Now, unfortunately, in my view, the government's housing increase is one that is going to be exceedingly difficult for us to meet in Tunbridge and Malling. We are 71% green belts. We have got a third of the areas in the area of outstanding natural beauty. So automatically we'll be looking to the sites that fall outside of those to form the basis of the local plan. This site does fall out of both of those. And given the way the government are going, and given the fact that we find it increasingly difficult to defend appeals in the green belt, I regret to say that this is my anticipation that this site will probably be developed in the not too distant future. I don't think it should be. I don't wish it to be developed. But unfortunately, the government are putting local authorities like this in an invidious position at the moment. So therefore, if we want to prevent that being the case, we need to have the best grounds to refusal and not necessarily the most grounds to refusal. And I'm very struck by the report that was published on this, which gave us some advice. One of the speakers one of the very early speakers said, this site can be considered, I'm verbatim here, sustainable because this is just a few hundred yards from a mainline railway station. And that is correct. And there's good access by car, regardless of obviously access into and out of the site, but obviously once you want to navigate yourself out of the site, you're on the Waterbury Road. You can walk to a train station. So I think it's incredibly difficult for us to sustain that ground, given what we know about our policy position. And I would strongly encourage the movers of the proposal to drop that ground. I think I would probably support refusal if that ground is dropped. But if that ground remains, I'm going to find it very difficult. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I can just come back on some of those grounds, I'll pick up some of them and then Robin can come back in. I think I was going to first of all start on issues in terms of the AQMA and quality assessment that you were looking for, and Robin can go into a bit more detail on this. I think if I could refer you to the TA that was submitted with the application, it has been referred to tonight. Paragraphs 5.3.2, page 18, refers to the breakdown of a traffic going through, which was requested by KTC, going south via the Waterbury Crossroads, and it says an AM peak of 4, a PM peak of 3, and all day from 0700 hours to 1900 hours of 30 units. So when you're breaking that down, that was considered discernible to have any impact on the traffic through that junction. Now, KCC didn't object to what was set out in that TA and the assessment that come forward on that basis. And I think from information that I'm aware of, that on the basis of the very low level of throughput of traffic on the basis of the TA, and that was considered negligible in terms of impact on the air quality, and therefore a further assessment wasn't undertaken or requested following further discussions between the officer and our environmental health officer. So that's my understanding, and Robin can come back to me if I'm wrong on that point. But if we move on from the other points, in terms of badger risk, you posed the question, why has that come forward now? Well, obviously, an ongoing process in terms of the application. We would go and constantly speak to our ACC ecological advisors as we're going through and preparing for this report. So just to make sure that as any situation hasn't changed, we carry on that communication. With that ongoing communication we've had with our ecological advisors and looking at the time period for implementation, they have suggested as a sort of an additional measure to those conditions already attached, that we add that additional condition requiring that survey to be covered. Because as I said previously, we don't know when the development will come forward, and that is considered good practice to make sure we have an robust badger survey which will inform the reserve matters detail. So hopefully that deals on that point. And in terms of, I did note in terms of the housing need and sustainability. I mean, obviously, I think we've already commented on in terms of whether that ground is substantiated and supportable. I think those were the grounds that you asked us to cover. But Robin, if I've got that first assessment correct.
No, that what Mr. Bailey has said is correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I won't go on, just mention a few things. First of all, regarding Councillor Tanner's point, and indeed your point, I recall, was concerning the site in Teeson Road, Kings Hill. And of course, the difference between that site and this site is that that site was in the existing local plan. And it's been said this is a legal process. As it was in the local plan, the grounds for refusing it were exceedingly difficult to find. If this site was in the existing local plan, members would be in the same position, but it's not. And also, I'm sorry if members felt this document, which I did receive through my letterbox, was intimidating in some way. And I'm not going to go on about this, but I would say this, that I feel as the government's toughened up, if you put it that way, the planning system and made it more and more difficult for local councils to exercise their discretion and refuse applications, the public are getting more and more, how should I put it, upset with the planning system, and I'm afraid the planners take the wash from that. And I say to the government, it will get worse if you alter planning committees and reduce local input into the system. And it feeds into this idea generally across the Western world that those in power don't take any notice of people. And the consequence of that is people then throw all those people out and elect what I would consider unsuitable people. Anyway, coming back to the issues of this application, it seems to me that Councillor Tanner did a really good exposition of the position. And just to say about East Malling, it is a village that still feels like a village. When you come in the gateway, coming down past this site, past Huntley Cottage, and you see the Ivy Farm with its oast on the left and that, it's still part of a village. And when you walk out to the south of the village, it's all open farmyards and fields and woods. And I think that's an important quality of the village. And just to balance that, of course, you still do get the view that it's a village coming in from the north, because you come up New Road with its walls on either side. And even though what was called the Parkside development took place, we were able to, in meeting the research, get them to move the access away from the village. And we also persuaded them that you should keep the view between Bradburn House and the church, which is a historic part of the village. And of course, on the other side of the road, we have the playing fields, which were previously the parkland to Clare House. So to that extent, there's still a sense of identity, even when you're coming from the north, because there's a separation between the village and the estates. It seems to me, going to the report that's been circulated, that there is an arguable case on heritage. And indeed, in paragraphs 6.2 and 6.3, the officers say it is acknowledged that the assessment of harm is a subjective matter. And that's repeated again in the following paragraph. And I think that's the case. I think it can be argued, if necessary, that grounds 1 and 2 are heritage issues that can be argued in front of an inspector. And even if one lost, which I don't anticipate, a reasonable inspector would think they are arguable grounds. And just to say, I've been this route before with 40 acres, where we had loads of area meetings, and I ended up arguing with the borough solicitor at the time, or the solicitor at the time representing the council, that there wouldn't be an order for costs, and he thought there would be. And they did in fact apply for an order for costs, and against my parish council, which gave me qualms at the time. And then the case at the public inquiry, although rejected, was accepted by the inspector, clearly from the remarks being made that it was an arguable case, and the applicant, who I was advised always prize for costs, withdrew that. And therefore, there was no costs against the council. But I don't think it should be used as a threat in this case. Not threat, but it's not a material planning consideration, but costs should be taken into account, and that's difficult to balance. But I don't think there's a real risk of costs in this case. On the grounds of refusal, because an issue's been made of it, could I ask specifically, please, regarding paragraph 6.7, where it says there are no first floor windows adjacent to the proposed access? Do we think that the officers think there are no glazed windows, or what's the explanation, please? And I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to come back on that, the property adjacent, the predominant windows face front and back. There are secondary windows on the rear north side of the property, but they are basically form part of almost like a bay. So there's not just one window that faces due south down onto the site. So effectively there are secondary windows, and there's only the information that it was shown on some of the information that's been circulated to members that there was a second first floor window. That's not actually there on site. And so there is one set of windows at the back. Yes, they're full height, but they're secondary windows to a primary window which faces directly to the rear across the garden.
So just to come back, it's the type of window that the assessment I'm talking about. Is that it? Thank you.
And just to highlight on that point, I mean, previously, we don't have adopted privacy standards. You used to have in the Kent Design Guide, I'm sure members of this committee were aware that as officers, we used to refer to a privacy distance of 21 metres on back-to-back. I'm talking back-to-back windows on single aspect windows that you had a privacy distance of 21 metres. Now, that's not recognised, but it was good practice because it was in a previous Kent design, but it's not adopted policy. But that just gives an indication of what previously you considered, because you're meant to look at privacy on an individual basis. But it just gives you an indication of what privacy used to be considered up on a back-to-back basis, where quite clearly that was considered that the human eye wouldn't actually pick up the detail. But 21 metres is less than what you've got in this instance. And let's not forget, we're not fixing access. We're not fixing layout at this stage. We don't know the orientation of dwellings. I would expect a reserved matters application to look at privacy in detail as part of that reserved matters. And members still have the control and the authority when reserved matters comes forward. They consider there's an overlooking issue, deal with it at that particular stage. But I would expect the officers and the applicant who's in the room to address it at that particular point. I didn't want to go into too much detail on that, but I wanted to pick up on what Councillor Thornwell did raise. And it's quite right. The report doesn't set out, and it is an agreed point, that there is less than substantial harm. So in terms of what is set out in the report, it's both agreed from the developers' heritage assessment and the Conservation Officer's appraisal that it's agreed that there is less than substantial harm. I'm not saying substantial, less than substantial. And paragraphs in the MPPF, I think it's 214, sets out that you have to, when making the assessment, weigh the benefits, public benefits that arise against any harm. That's the test that members are applying tonight, which is recognised and set out in your reports. You're effectively saying that there's less than substantial harm on the ground of refusal. Now, effectively, do those harms, less than substantial harms, outweigh the public benefits, which are quite substantial in this case? And I'm sure Gilbert can go through those public benefits. They are significant in terms of affordable housing when there is a deficit of affordable housing in the borough. There's other benefits that are arising from that scheme in terms of contributions that are coming forward arising from the schemes that would be secured in Section 106. So I just think, there is an arguable case the officers haven't tried to distance themselves from that point because there is less than substantial harm. The test that members have to go through is that balancing exercise, and we have to come back to, and I hate to reappraise it again, you have to come back to the significant and demonstrable test that you are required to set out, that those harms have to be significant and demonstrable, override assessment you have to undertake. And that's quite a high bar in planning terms, a significant and demonstrable bar, because it's intended to be a high bar, because there is a need for development in the borough, and we're not meeting our housing need because we're at 2.89 years supply. So just hopefully that highlights and addresses the point you've raised. Thank you.
I promise I'll be quick. Just to say, I did go and have a visit to East Malling and have a look at the area, which was great, and tried my best to read all the bits of information that came through. But so it was good to have all of that. For me, there's a couple of things really. It's a balance, as we've all said. It is a shame we don't have an excellent local plan, because every time we turn something down somewhere, we know it's got to go somewhere else, and I struggle with that. In general, in actuality, the professionalism of our planning officers is something I'm impressed with, and I have always been. And in other things that we've considered, it's always been my view that I will bow to their knowledge and their experience, because that's what they have. I think in this situation, it feels like we're talking about whether this is rules or judgment. And that's where I've kind of got a little bit stuck. So I know that we will get fantastic advice on those rules, but I also thought I would just remind myself who was on the Area 2 Planning Committee, because it's their judgment that we're talking about here, and they are the ultimate decision makers. So I had a look at that list, and it's a brilliant list of all our, brightest and greatest councillors, perhaps, lots of cabinet members in there. And it made me think what has changed between those 3 refusals and now. So if that Area 2 Planning Committee has refused this 3 times, I'm just trying to work out what's changed, because actually it feels to me that the only thing's changed is that we are now more worried about badgers. So that's where I'm at, that balance between the rules and the advice from our fantastic planning officers and the judgment of some really experienced Area 2 councillors. So at the moment, I think I'm probably minded to support the Area 2 Planning Committee in their previous decisions.
Councillor Rose.
Your Deputy Worship, thank you very much. Outline planning applications have never really sat happily with members, I've always thought. Area 1, we always used to moan about it. And this is an outline application with all matters reserved except for the access. So what I'd like to know first of, and I apologise if I'm going over something that's been said on the previous meetings, but what I'd like to know is, if there has been a pre-planning meeting, and I suspect there has, why have officers not encouraged access to be more central within that site? Because that would obviously get over the immediate residents and cars passing their front door, as it were. I'd just like to know why that access hasn't been more centrally located. This is an outline application for up to 52 residential dwellings. It says it there in black and white, Chairman. And what I want to know is, how secure is that terminology of up to 52 dwellings? Because we know what happens with outline application. The applicant comes back and says, oh, I can squeeze 3 more houses in that little bit there, and we'll up the numbers. And it's happened before. The 5th speaker spoke of biodiversity, but he also spoke and said, what is the point of us being here? Now, 30 years ago, Councillor Sonia Beaton said that very statement in the Castle Chamber because we couldn't refuse something. What was the point of us being here? Mr. Bailey has just mentioned privacy, so we can't go over that again because he explained that. And one last little comment. I know it's a layout not defined, but I'm really surprised that they stuck a play area under a power cable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got a list of people now, so I think we'll just proceed with that, and then the officers can respond a little bit later. So next on the list is Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Your Deputy Worship. What I like to do in these kind of debates is sort of do my little hit list before I start listening to everybody else. And I'll just rattle through that because I'm mindful of time and I'm not going to repeat everybody else. Actually, before I start this, I do want to concur with Councillor Tanner that her concerns about the way things have developed here were my concerns as well, but I'm going to park those and put them to one side. So my little hit list here, and then I'm going to expand on each one as to how that will work out in the conclusion of this application. Grade of land is one. It's like sort of farming background, sort of instantly kicks in, I'm afraid. Then I've got sustainable development. I know my colleague, Councillor, my leader, has mentioned about sustainability, but I'm sort of in two minds about that. I think sustainability is important in this case, particularly safe access into the site, and it's a consideration, I'm sure. Anyway, I'll carry on. Impacts on the setting of the conservation area, whilst not in the conservation area as such. Air quality, and that's the air, particularly the AQMA at Wateringbury. I've said a lot of agricultural land now, I'm repeating myself. An impact on the increased traffic on the setting of the East Malling Conservation Area. And then finally, reservations about all the history of the badger issues. And finally, the very final one is obviously the impact on the local heritage assets. I think that's probably, for me, is probably the biggest one here. And the main reason why I feel it is probably the biggest, the strongest, is because it is purely subjective. And I understand Councillor Bailey's explanation, but it still goes back to subjective. And I think that's where this sort of stacks up here in the site, in the actual positioning of this development and the impact on those very strong local heritage assets is a major concern for me. So I think as a reason for refusal, based on the fact that it is subjective, I think that's quite a strong reason in itself, because it's one that's difficult to argue either way. So if it were to go to appeal under that refusal, then because it is subjective, then I think again, the likelihood of costs when you're using something like that, where I think with local knowledge, you can use that quite powerfully. I think then the likelihood of costs against that refusal argument, I'd be surprised at. The AQMA argument might be going down the sustainability argument. I'm looking at the access into this site from either you go through East Malling, which is clearly an issue because of the road networks going through there. And again, with my climate change hat on, I'm just thinking about the impact of traffic then through the very narrow roads through that village. And then consequently, if you think, right, okay, well, we'll try the other way, Wateringbury. And then that's when you hit the crossroads in the AQMA. And, you know, we've got an AQMA there because it's clearly an air quality issue down there. And I can only see that when you add in more traffic movements, it's inevitable that that AQMA will be impacted. So I think really on those two main issues, and then I won't go into too much detail because it's already been detailed, but the history of the way the badger issues have developed as such in many different ways. I have so much reservations about that just right from day one when we heard this in the very first area too, I had reservations as to how that was dealt with, and I still do now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Having said that, I want to go around members. I think Mr. Bailey wants to just look at that point specifically.
I just want to help members on the assessment, because in terms of the dare I say it, the experts, the conservation officers have agreed that, and members have agreed that it's less than substantial harm. So the assessment in terms of the balancing has been made. What members really need to make is the planning judgment. So the impact on the conservation effectively has already been agreed by members in terms of less than substantial. What members really need to decide is this balancing exercise, which is the less than substantial harms weighed against the public benefits. And then once you've done that first part of the test, the second part is are those harms significantly, do those harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh those benefits? That's really what members need to assess tonight, not really the assessment of what that level of harm is, because that's already been set out in the grounds. And I just thought that's hopefully that helps members in terms of the assessment, because that's the planning balance that you need to make, not really the conservation assessment, because that's already been done. And I wasn't going to go into the AQMA because you have referred those as two crucial parts. I did refer in terms of the leader's response earlier, in terms of what the transport assessment has made in terms of, and it did conclude, I mean, I don't quote it, I gave you the paragraph number, but it does conclude that they are negligible impacts due to the numbers of cars that are passing through that crossroads. Now, that data in the transport assessment has been effectively agreed to by KCC Highways on the basis that they haven't raised an objection. They specifically asked for that assessment to be analysed as part of the TA, so that was an additional requirement. So in terms of the evidence base that's before you, said that there is a negligible impact in terms of AQMA, and our environmental health officer hasn't raised any objection on those bases going forward. So I just thought on those two key points, I thought I would highlight. I know there's lots of other members' debates to continue, so thank you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Robin Gilbert, can I just ask you a question? Because I want to go back to these windows. I'm ever so sorry, because it's a bit of a pernickety point. Did I hear you say that the information that had been circulated and that we'd all received, that those windows didn't actually exist, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, partially wrong. Yeah, one of the windows that was shown on the plan with the document that was circulated isn't actually present on site. So on the plan that was circulated, it showed the side elevation of the building, and it showed a small window in a tiled elevation, and that's not actually there. Okay, so the photograph is correct, but the plan is not correct. Okay, all right, no, I understand. I wanted to get at whether the information we had was correct, and it is and it isn't. So I understand that. Thank you very much. But what we are seeing is that from those photographs, there are in fact glass panels, which I would describe as windows, in the elevation that is going to overlook the access way. Is that correct? Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Tatton, did you want to specifically talk to that point?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I think just to clarify that I think the plan potentially is one that the neighbour has permission for. So some of the windows have been installed, and perhaps that one has not been implemented. But it's probably a plan that was taken from their planning application. But yes, there is a window. There are windows in the site.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Next on the list is Councillor Dave Davis, please.
Thank you. I just want to try and get in balance. So to go back to Lindsay, original advice from Lindsay Pearson. There's common sense and there's planning law, and you mustn't confuse the two. And I think it's particularly relevant here. We are trying to work this on planning law. Just looking at the number of houses that we've got there, in the air quality thing, if I've got it right, we've got to assess the effect of the number of cars we can expect from 52 houses added onto whatever is there now, and to decide whether there's a significant increase in that. My second one that I'd like clarification on is how relevant is the East Malling conservation area for this application, to this specific application? And with it, how important is the existing landscape in relevance to this particular application? And I was a bit confused on the grade 2 listed buildings. I thought you said, Robin, that the only one was the listed building opposite 51. but I think that people were saying that there were quite a few more that were affected by this. If we could just clarify that, please. Councillor Boughton has amply dealt with the GP issue that we've got. Sadly, the GPs are not party to this. We have to deal with the ICB, and they say there is no problem. And it's typical with them and with Kent County Council on roads. We're just left believing that things are not right, but that we have to accept what they say, because that is the one which will be taken in any appeal. And it's very, very sad to see agricultural land, grade 2 agricultural land, being taken up for this. It's all grade 2 agricultural land. And in my common sense world, that is more valuable than areas of national outstanding beauty, green belt, or anything else for the future, because once it's used forever. Thank you very much. Could you clarify this?
Thank you, Councillor Davis. On the plan that I've just put up, the listed buildings are the red dots. So the site areas in the purple. Listed buildings in the vicinity of the site are red dots. So there's only one which is in the immediate vicinity of the site. The other ones are within the East Malling Conservation Area, and the distance between the very top corner of that site to the southern boundary of the East Malling Conservation Area is 60 metres. So there's a sizable distance between the two elements.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, so I've got 4 members on the list. So, Councillor Crisp, you're next.
Hey, thank you, Vice Mayor. Yeah, it's kind of disappointing that we're here yet again, having reviewed development 3 times before, and forcing the East Malling residents to present their case for the 4th time. But keeping my comments brief, as what has been said tonight, I believe this development is wrong on so many levels and will be a blight on the landscape and damaging to the heritage of the area. It'll destroy a 100-year-old orchard and add to our long-term food insecurity, as David just mentioned, as Robin Betts, as the farmer, would know. With the world in turmoil at the moment, and the prospect of having to import inferior foodstuffs from abroad, chlorinated chicken for one, because we can't grow our own produce, would be horrendous. It'll be a blight on wildlife, including protected species, obviously, been mentioned a lot, badgers, obviously, where an expert report that I read, I quote, this site is not suitable for a housing estate and badgers have not been added. And of course, the report that just came out before the meeting, that's actually buys that note. It'll be a blight on the transport system, which is wholly inadequate, quite frankly dangerous. As we've heard, a child was injured by a car due to the narrowness of the road just a few weeks ago. And moving the access road is not going to change that fact, because the road is very, very dangerous, terrifying for pedestrians and cyclists, which is there's no provision for. And I know, as been mentioned 2 or 3 times, riding my bike, it was unbelievable with cars at inches away, and I had to dismount many times to let cars pass. And I've said never again. And God knows how children would get to school other than by car, which is against the policy of the MPPF. Now, the Highways Department believe that traffic numbers are not significantly high concerning this development. I think they must be thinking of a different road. With so many housing estates already having gained planned permission, and as mentioned earlier, a couple of miles away, the traffic can only get worse. This needs to be taken into account by councillors. But most of all, it will cause a blight on the local people living in East Malling and the surrounding area, including many who have had very passionate, valid reasons to refuse this station. Having engaged professional bodies such as CRE and independent consultants to help them, and have also rejected the plans. This is not NIMBYism, it is a genuine heartfelt plea to save their way of life. After all, they will have to live with the consequences of our decision.
And I'm sure, given the facts that have come out recently, especially tonight, a planning inspector would see that reasons for refusal are genuine, as written as a requirement in the NPPF, and the risks of costs would be minimal. The residents voted for us, and we represent them, and our views and decisions should have meaning. We cannot base our decision on what may or may not happen at a later date. We must base our decisions on the material planning considerations presented to us as written in the NPPF. And what is all for is basically tick boxes and another batch of the wrong houses built in the wrong place that, as the government has told us, to blindly pursue with unachievable housing targets at the expense of local people, local environment, is dictatorial. And it makes us as councillors pretty worthless, almost redundant. And basically, as Councillor Harman said not a few weeks ago, I think enough is enough. Development would create more harm than good.
Thank you very much. Chairman of Area 2.
Thank you, Your Worship. Right, before I start actually discussing the thing, can I just concur with Councillor Borden and Councillor Tanner about my support for the officers all the way through this process since last September and before for them for putting the report together, and the constant bombardment that Area 2 have had from the residents for then. I will speak about something that I hoped I'd have seen from them, but I actually haven't. Area 2, thank you, Councillor Atwell, for your confidence in our judgment. This came to Area 2, first of all, last September, and it was refused. Deferred, sorry, it was deferred for various reports to come through. We then went to our second sitting. Unfortunately, a number of our members were either away or were ill, and we were quite reduced in our numbers. It was refused at that point, and then we went to our third, where costs had to be considered. We didn't actually go through that meeting because people had not been either at the first meeting or the second meeting. They could not actually be in the third meeting. So the only people in the third meeting were myself, the four members from the wards, and Councillor Banks and Councillor Chris. So that's how it went through. It's actually judged almost by the ward members that were there, which is not to say that it was wrong what was done. I fear what will happen. We are losing control of this, whatever happens. Whichever way this is voted for tonight, this council, as Councillor Davies said, we lose control of it. If it is refused, the developer will appeal it, and we will go to PINS, and if they approve it, then we lose any control over any conditions we can put on it. If we don't approve, if we go with the residents and refuse it, or we approve it for the developer, the residents will, I'm sure, as they have already said, wish to call judicial review, which again, we will just lose control of anything that goes on this site. I had hoped, I voted both ways in these three things. Twice I voted to refuse it, and the last time I voted to approve it. My reasoning why, despite gaffes from the public gallery, my reasons why is, despite officers spending some time with the ward members to put some wording together for reasons to refuse, I didn't believe that they were strong enough reasons for us to go to appeal on. I would dearly like to see some stronger reasons. Maybe this new Badger report is something that needs to be considered. I still don't know which way I will go. But yes, it is a very interesting decision to make at this moment. What I had hoped to see from the residents was an independent traffic report, rather than just local people saying how bad the traffic is. Because when it goes to appeal or goes to another judgment with somebody who comes from anywhere in the country, all they've got in front of them is the paperwork where Kent Hideways say it's fine. I'm afraid residents, however good they are and however detailed the reports are, it's not part of what is considered. Anyway, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor King.
Thank you, Your Worship. Some of the points have sort of been touched on, but I don't think they've been answered. I assume it isn't Greenbelt, but there was a reference to best most valuable agricultural land, and I wrote down, well, does that mean it's 1, 2 or 3A? I think Councillor Davis said it's grade 2. So I'd like that confirmed, please, because I find that quite important. But there is reference about the fact that it's farmland, etc. Well, there isn't enough brownfield knocking around, so I struggle with that. I also struggle with the whole concept of biodiversity net gain and how it really works. As Councillor Atwell knows, in our ward we recently had a site which was an old builder's merchant. Well, you could stick a tulip bulb in there and it would have improved the biodiversity. This is more difficult. And then there's another thing I struggle with is sustainability. What the hell does it really mean? But I travel around the country, and for example, I just come back from Suffolk. There are developments that are in the middle of nowhere. So basically, those are still considered sustainable, and they don't have buses running up and down, and they don't live next to a train station. The people I really sympathise with, the people that move to somewhere which has a perfectly good service, and then it gets taken away, because they move there under a certain set of, criteria. So I struggle with what that means in legal and planning terms, and in reality, really. We didn't get an answer about why the access is where it is at the moment. Because although we had some poetic license about the fact crossing over into it creates a bridge, I didn't quite understand why that would be. Given that the land is lower, why wouldn't you immediately go down? You wouldn't go like that, would you? So it's the position and the degree of intrusion caused by the access that I think we do need to understand. And does it have to be where it is? And the degree of overlooking and the overbearing nature, I guess, will only be settled by the design when it comes forward at a later stage. Again, recently, at the same site I was talking about, there was an agreement that a building was 28 foot from a house, and yes, it didn't have a window in it. It was a flank wall, but that was considered acceptable. I personally didn't, but it was considered within the rules. So there are some quite tight parameters now, and we are really being screwed for housing numbers. I mean, we had challenging targets before, and yes, we will have to decide when we push back and how we push back. But we are in that position, unfortunately, and there's no getting away from it. And finally, with regard to the boundaries, I think there is a degree of personal choice there. You can have a piece of string as a boundary to your property, or you could have a 2-metre fence, or you could have some screening that's put in by the developer. So you can't legislate that, and you can't always say it can be exactly the same the day after something is developed. You have to make your own judgment about that. So, but I really struggle because I understand the difference this will make to this village. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got two more speakers, and then I think the officers can respond all together. So, Councillor Close.
Sorry, Chair, but can we have an answer to the question of confirmation that it's grade 2 and regarding the access, which Councillor Rose brought?
Briefly, Robin.
Thank you, Ron. Just touching on things, it's not greenbelt. It is grade 2 agricultural land. The access is where it is because it's actually there's an existing gap in the hedgerow, and also it actually is also where there's the existing speed table on the entrance into East Malling Village. If you go further south along Wateringbury Road, the speed limit's actually higher. So therefore, the access will need greater visibility displays. So if you put it up where the speed table is, it requires less actual vegetation to be removed to create the access.
Councillor Clokey.
Thank you. A couple of points and then a barrage of small questions. Sorry. But first, can I just agree with everyone who said the planning team are diligent and skilled professionals who are doing their best to give us advice on sustainable planning decisions. So please treat them accordingly. And secondly, on the other point around the pack that went round, I'm sure residents didn't intend that to be intimidating, but for reasons that were pointed out earlier, that was the effect it had on some members. So if any member of the public is watching, maybe in future stick to email. In terms of questions, on the house, there was a point around light strobing as a result of headlights passing across. Would it be possible at the appropriate point to condition an appropriate piece of barrier that would prevent that? There was a question around, there was a point made by a member of the public around overlooking forming a nuisance. I'm not a lawyer. Is nuisance in the legal sense a planning matter, or is that a separate action? On the point of badgers, someone said the applicant has said they do not intend to apply to close a set. Can we condition that they don't? In terms of the access to the area, someone mentioned pushchairs. From the point of view of, say, a wheelchair user, it seems like the train station is inaccessible. Any way out using the pavements is inaccessible. What is the definition of sustainable from an access point of view for a wheelchair user? And then a last point, I think I've heard both phrases on significant and demonstrable harm. I might have been confused by two different statements made at different points. Are we looking at significant demonstrable harm that outweighs the public benefit, or harms that significantly and demonstrably outweigh the public benefit? Because I think I heard both. And secondly, is that a test to be applied to each harm or cumulatively across all harms identified?
Effectively, it's the latter test, but not cumulative. You're not assessing, you're just assessing the development. You're assessing the development in terms of the heritage impact, making that assessment against the public benefit. So the harms that have arisen against the public benefit, which effectively then conclude that those members who refuse it, that those public benefits, that the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the public benefit. Those are the tests that you're having to do, but purely in relation to heritage effects. That's clear. And then in terms of some of the other matters, you did go through a whole load of other questions. I did write down, and my handwriting has gone like I won't say what it's like, but so in terms of statutory nuisance, there is in terms of definition, planning in terms of nuisance, in terms of amenity, different that nuisance dealt with by environmental health under section. So a different bar, it's a higher bar in terms of environmental health, but in planning, it's normally a sort of a judgment supposed to be, whereas environmental health, they'll have testing and it's set down in certain parameters and they'll test that again. But in planning, it's a judgment in terms of the impact in amenity of a resident you know, by it could be overbearing if it's in close proximity, or it could result in overlooking, that kind of instance. So if that answers your question, difference between in terms of statutory planning impact. In terms of close, you said close of the set as a condition. We couldn't impose that requirement because it's effectively something that we would, we don't control goals, set life, no control over that in terms of whether there's a requirement. What we look at is evidence suggested in addition to deal with that at the time, because sets can come and go. They can close down and they can open up. They can have more openings on that set. So we would need to make that judgment at the time of the reserve matters application. Wouldn't condition that affect is the set, because judgment, again, we have no control over that. Now, the definition of sustainable development for disabled users, I don't have that to hand. I couldn't give you what definition. I might do a Google search if the debate continues. So I'll come back to you on that one. And in terms of the light spread, could you impose a condition to deal with light spread? You potentially could. You could impose a condition in terms of mitigation, but what you'd normally do is you'd normally impose a condition, you know, details fitted for the first reserve matters, so measures to prevent light spillage from cars entering the site from the main highway. So in terms of, could you impose a condition if you improve the development? Yes, you could. And I think that addresses your.
Thank you. I thought I'd just respond to one or two things members have raised. I think with regard to agricultural land, I share the concern of members at the steady loss of agricultural land, and as you've drawn out, this is grade 2. But I'm afraid my judgment is government policy at the moment doesn't give much credence to protecting agricultural land, and indeed no one's keeping a record of what's been lost district by district, county by county, or whatever. But going back to what I said earlier on, I notice in the election leaflets coming round from Reform that the one thing they criticise the planning system for is not protecting agricultural land. So they picked up on it, and it's about time the other parties, including my own, pick up on it as well. No. And the highway issues, I don't think you can have a standalone highway issue because the county don't consider it severe, and they never consider any planning application severe as far as I can see. Presumably because they don't want to take the risk of trying to persuade some inspector what it means. And I think the traffic issue here is the impact on the conservation area, which is detrimental, people's listed buildings being struck and that sort of thing. And planning conditions I wrote down, of course, when you refuse an application, if this goes to appeal, the officers are expected to produce a list of planning conditions for the inspector to look at. Should he allow the development? And I would expect in this case the conditions that were originally set out in Area 2 papers would be produced by the officers. And respectfully, if I may say so, the badger one they've come up with tonight. Yes, there's always the risk the inspector might not accept them all, but that's a risk every time you refuse something. if you approve something, of course, with conditions, there's nothing to stop the applicant appealing some of the conditions, though usually, I think, officers have agreed the conditions with the applicant in advance. I hope they have. But anyway, I think we ought to test the situation. So I'm going to move that the Area 2 recommendations 1 to 6 be accepted. With regard to what Matt said, I've thought about that. Of course, it's open to anyone to propose an amendment, if this is seconded, deleting such a condition at a refusal ground. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder for that?
Just on that basis, because I just do a correction, it seems to be a typo error on the sheets and it refers to ground 1 in terms of paragraph 213 on the MPPF. Should be referring to 215 and 216. So if members go down that refusal note tonight, if we could just note, I don't know how that appeared there, but if we could just refer to 215, 216 and not 213, that refers to substantial.
If I amend what I said.
Thank you.
I do still have concerns about the fourth reason for the reasons I articulated earlier. I note that when Area Planning Committee 2 considered this for the last time in February, the grounds changed from the report it received at that meeting because it added 2 more grounds. After January meeting, 4 grounds were proposed. We then got a cost report on those 4 grounds. We then got 6 grounds emerged from the February meeting. I just want to double check that the comments that were given to the 3rd meeting in relation to the Part 2 report remain. I don't want to go into Part 2. I don't want to have a discussion about it, but I just want to, maybe this is a question for Adrian, just to confirm that the advice that we got at that meeting still remains as is, and a yes/no will suffice.
Put simply, I can confirm that the Part 2 deals with those grounds. So what members have in front of them is based on those 6 grounds.
Okay, so we have a proposal from Councillor Thornywell to refuse planning permission. Alison, do we have you have the full details of the proposal, or perhaps Councillor Thornywell could just repeat himself, and that's going to be seconded.
The proposal from David Thornywell and seconded by Councillor Round is to agree or approve the reasons for refusal of Area 2, 1 to 6, subject to the minor amendments regarding paragraph number. Fine.
Are you happy with that? It's seconded. Okay, so all those in favour of.
I can do a show of hands if you're comfortable with that. Roll call.
If we're going to do a roll call, okay, go ahead.
Okay, we'll do a roll call.
Sorry, Chairman. Are we approving refusal?
Yes.
We are refusing.
Or refusing refusal?
If you vote for, you are for the recommendation to refuse. So 4 is to refuse. Always gets a bit. When I call your name, if you can indicate if you're for, against, or abstaining, and we'll start with yourself, Your Worship. Councillor Brown.
I'm against.
Councillor Athol.
Changing my name to begin with Z, but I'm for.
Councillor Banks.
For.
Councillor Barton. Councillor Bell. For. Councillor Benison.
Against.
Councillor Betts.
For.
Councillor Bishop.
For.
Councillor Bolton.
For.
Councillor Boxall. Sorry. The Councillor Cannon.
For.
Councillor Clokey.
Against.
Councillor Coffin.
4.
Councillor Crisp.
4.
Councillor Davis.
4. 4.
4. 4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4.
4. 4.
4.
Against?
4.
4.
4.
4. 4.
We have a total of 30 voted for refusal. I have 4 against, and we have 1 missing.
Okay, that's been carried. If the members of the public would like to leave, we'll just continue with the rest of the. It's not you, Councillor Hood. I mean, no. Thank you, James. Okay, if we could just row on with this, ladies and gentlemen. Item 12 then, minutes of the Cabinet and committees. Minute book, volume 2 has been published as a supplement, as is the matter for information. Can we ask for approval and noted? Okay, item 13 is the sealing of documents to authorise the common seal of the council to be affixed to any contract minutes or other document requiring the same. Can we agree with that? Okay, well done, members. It's 21:42 and the meeting is now closed. Thank you for coming. It is very late, isn't it? What was it? 23:42.
Please all be